The Saturday night before the Jubilee was loud. It was not the kind of loud that comes from a television or a radio. It was the loudness of victory. Downstairs in the living room I had built with my own hands, my wife and my daughter-in-law were throwing a party. It was a small party, just the two of them, but they were making enough noise for a legion of demons. I sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, staring at an open suitcase. I was supposed to be packing. I was supposed to be folding my shirts, gathering my toiletries, and preparing to move into a 12 by 12 room at Golden Horizon on Monday morning. That was the script they had written for me. The defeated old man packing away his life, making way for the new regime. But the suitcase was empty. I wasn't packing clothes. I was packing ammunition. I stood up and walked to the door, cracking it open just an inch. The sounds of their celebration drifted up the stairs like toxic smoke. I heard the distinct pop of a champagne cork. It wasn't the cheap stuff. It sounded like Dom Perignon. Bernice had developed expensive taste lately, funded by the generous souls of St. Jude's. I crept out into the hallway, moving silently on socked feet. I stopped at the top of the landing, staying in the shadows. I could see into the living room below. Emily was standing in the center of the room holding a crystal flute. She was spinning around, her arms wide, looking at the walls as if she were already measuring them for demolition. "It is going to be perfect, Bernice," Emily squealed, her voice high and shrill. "We knock out this wall here between the living room and the dining room. It will open up the entire space. We can put the reception desk right there by the entrance, and the studio. Oh, the studio will be magnificent. We will rip out this old carpet and put in bamboo flooring, sustainable bamboo." She took a swig of champagne. "I can see it now. Namaste yoga at the Freeman House. It has such a ring to it, don't you think?" Bernice was sitting on the sofa, my sofa, with her feet propped up on the coffee table. She was laughing, a sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. "It sounds divine, Emily," she said. "Just make sure you keep the noise down on Sunday mornings. I need my beauty sleep before service." Emily giggled. "Oh, don't worry. Sundays are for restoratives. Quiet meditation." She walked over to Bernice and grabbed her hand, pulling it up toward the light. "But forget the studio for a second," Emily said, her eyes widening. "Look at that rock, Mom, seriously. When did you get that?" I leaned forward. On Bernice's ring finger, replacing the simple gold band I had placed there 45 years ago, was a diamond the size of a grape. It caught the light from the chandelier, throwing sparkles across the room. Bernice admired her hand, twisting it back and forth. "Isn't it breathtaking?" she cooed. "It was a gift. From the deacon board. They presented it to me yesterday privately. They said it was a token of appreciation for my 40 years of service. A Jubilee gift, they called it. A lie. The deacon board was composed of 5 men who complained if we spent more than $50 on coffee for the fellowship hall. They didn't buy diamond rings." Emily laughed, a knowing, conspiratorial sound. "Wow. The deacon board must really love you. Or maybe a certain member of the clergy has excellent taste in jewelry." Bernice swatted Emily's arm playfully. "Hush, you naughty girl. It is a blessing. That is all." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. They were so brazen. They were drinking my liquor, planning to gut my house, and wearing stolen money on their fingers, all while I was upstairs, presumably weeping into my pillow. I had heard enough. I retreated from the landing and walked down the hall to the master bedroom. Bernice hadn't slept in there for years, but she kept her desk there. It was her command center. It was where she managed the household accounts and, more importantly, the church ledgers. I tried the door. It was unlocked. Arrogance makes people sloppy. She thought I was beaten. She thought I was too confused to understand what a computer was, let alone how to access it. I slipped inside and closed the door softly. The room smelled of her perfume and the faint, lingering scent of Thomas's cologne. I sat at her desk. I woke up the computer. The password screen stared back at me. Bernice wasn't a technological genius. She used the same password for everything. For years it had been Jesus Saves. When that required a number, she changed it to Jesus Saves 1. I typed it in. Incorrect password. I paused. She had changed it. I thought about what mattered to her now. I thought about the new life she was building. I typed in Thomas 1980. Incorrect password. I sat back thinking. What was the one thing she cared about more than Thomas, more than the church, the money? I typed in Jubilee 50, the screen unlocked. I didn't waste time celebrating. I plugged in the USB drive I had brought from my room. I navigated straight to her documents folder. There were hundreds of files, sermons, prayer lists, recipes, but I was looking for the numbers. I found a folder labeled St. Jude Financials. I opened it. Inside was a spreadsheet named Discretionary Fund 2024. Internal. I double-clicked it. The spreadsheet filled the screen. It was a labyrinth of numbers, columns, and dates. I am an engineer. I speak the language of data. I scanned the rows. I saw the hotel charges, the Waldorf, the Ritz. I saw the consulting fees paid to shell companies I didn't recognize. I saw the cash withdrawals labeled as petty cash or outreach supplies. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a recurring monthly payment starting 6 months ago. The payee wasn't a company. It wasn't a charity. It was listed as E. Freeman Consulting Services. Amount $5,000. $5,000 a month. Going to E. Freeman. Emily Freeman. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my glasses. Emily wasn't a consultant. She didn't work for the church. She taught yoga part-time and spent the rest of her days shopping. Why was Bernice paying Emily $5,000 a month from the church's stolen funds? I scrolled back to the date of the first payment. It was 6 months ago. That was around the time Emily had suddenly become very interested in my health. That was around the time she had started whispering in Marcus's ear that I was losing my mind. And then it hit me. Emily didn't just stumble into this conspiracy. She hadn't been tricked by Bernice. She knew. She must have caught them. Maybe she saw them at a restaurant. Maybe she saw a text message on Bernice's phone. And instead of telling her husband, instead of telling Marcus that his mother was sleeping with the pastor, she had leveraged it. She had blackmailed her own mother-in-law. Pay me $5,000 a month or I tell the bishop. Pay me and I will help you get rid of Gus. It was the hush money, Emily. I felt a wave of nausea. This was worse than I thought. Emily wasn't just a greedy daughter-in-law trying to secure an inheritance. She was an active participant in the destruction of my family. She was the architect of my demise. I looked at the notes column next to one of the payments. Bernice had written a small comment, Yoga Studio Seed Money, Installment 4, Seed Money. They were funding her business with hush money stolen from the offering plate. I quickly highlighted the entire spreadsheet. I dragged it to the USB drive. I copied the bank statements. I copied the emails between Bernice and Thomas where they discussed hiding the assets. I took everything. When the progress bar hit 100%, I pulled the drive out. I put it in my pocket right next to the video of the safe. I shut down the computer. I wiped the keyboard with my handkerchief to remove my fingerprints just in case. I stood up and walked to the window. Down below in the backyard, the security lights had come on. I could see the garden where I had taught Marcus to play catch. I thought about Marcus. Did he know? He knew about the stealing. I had shown him that. But did he know his wife was blackmailing his mother? Did he know that the capital for the yoga studio wasn't a loan but the price of his mother's silence? Probably not. Emily treated Marcus like a mushroom, kept him in the dark, and fed him manure. I walked back into the hallway. The laughter from downstairs was louder now. They were drunk. They were high on their own brilliance. Cheers to the future, I heard Emily shout. To Namaste Yoga. To the future, Bernice yelled back. I walked back to the guest room. I closed the door. I sat on the bed and looked at my empty suitcase. I stood up and walked to the closet. I took out my best suit, the navy blue one I wore to weddings and funerals. I took out my crisp white shirt. I took out my polished black shoes. I laid them on the bed. I wasn't packing for a nursing home. I was packing for a war. Tomorrow was Sunday, the Jubilee. Bernice was going to stand on stage and accept her award. Thomas was going to preach about righteousness. Emily was going to sit in the front row wearing her expensive clothes bought with blood money, and I was going to be there. I picked up the USB drive and held it in my hand. It was so small, light as a feather, but inside it held the weight of 1,000 sins. They thought they were celebrating a victory tonight. They were popping champagne and planning renovations. Let them drink, let them laugh, because tomorrow the bill comes due, and I was going to make sure they paid every single cent. The Sunday pot roast tasted like ash in my mouth. For 30 years, Sunday dinner at the Freeman house was a sacred tradition. It was a time for laughter, for storytelling, for Marcus to tell me about his baseball games and later his college classes. But tonight, the air in the dining room was so thick with tension, I could have cut it with a knife. The clinking of silverware against china sounded like swords clashing on a battlefield. My son Marcus sat to my left. He is 40 years old, a grown man with a degree in accounting, but tonight he looked like a child waiting for permission to speak. He kept pushing his peas around his plate, avoiding my eyes. Next to him sat Emily, his wife. Emily is a woman who smiles with her mouth but never with her eyes. She is the kind of person who sends a thank you card that feels like an invoice. She has blonde hair that is always perfectly coiffed, and she speaks to me in a tone usually reserved for toddlers or golden retrievers. At the head of the table sat Bernice. She had recovered remarkably well from our confrontation in the kitchen this morning. She was playing the role of the long-suffering saint to perfection. She sighed every time she took a sip of water. She rubbed her temples as if my mere presence was giving her a migraine. I knew they were plotting something. I could feel the structural stress in the room. As an engineer, I know that when a load is unevenly distributed, the beams start to groan, and this family was groaning under the weight of a lie. Emily wiped her mouth with a linen napkin, leaving a smear of pink lipstick on the fabric. She placed her fork down with a deliberate click. "So, Dad," she began, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary concern that makes my skin crawl. "Mom called us this afternoon. She was very upset." I kept eating. I cut a piece of beef with precision. "Is that so?" I asked without looking up. "Did she tell you why she was upset? Did she tell you about the oysters?" Emily exchanged a look with Marcus. It was a quick, sharp glance like a signal between conspirators. "She told us about the incident in the garage," Gus, Emily said, dropping the dad and using my first name. "She told us you were rummaging through the donation boxes and started shouting about liquor bottles that weren't there." I stopped chewing. I looked at Bernice. She was staring at her plate, a small, tragic smile playing on her lips. "It was there," I said calmly. "A bottle of Hennessy Paradis, $1,500. Emily sighed a loud, theatrical exhale. "See, Marcus? This is exactly what I was reading about." She turned back to me, leaning forward, invading my personal space. "Dad, we are worried about you. Mom says you have been forgetting things lately. You get angry over nothing. You make up stories. And now accusing Mom of drinking. We all know she hasn't touched a drop since the Reagan administration." She paused for effect. "We think you might be having episodes, Dad. Paranoid delusions. It is a classic symptom of early onset dementia." I felt the blood rush to my face. Dementia, I was still consulting on bridge projects for the city. I did the New York Times crossword puzzle in pen every morning. My mind was sharper than the knife in my hand. "I am not senile, Emily," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And I am not paranoid. I saw the bottle. I saw the receipt. Room 404 at the Waldorf." Emily shook her head, looking at Marcus with pity. "He is fixating on numbers," she whispered to him as if I wasn't there. "Room 404. That is an error code on a computer, Dad. Your mind is playing tricks on you. You are confusing reality with whatever is happening in your head." Bernice finally spoke up. Her voice was weak, trembling. "He scared me, Marcus," he was shouting. He looked so wild. I didn't know if he was going to hit me. I locked myself in the bathroom until he went out to the yard. A lie. A bold-faced, evil lie. I slammed my hand on the table. The water glasses jumped. "I never raised a hand to you in 40 years, Bernice," I shouted. "See?" Emily shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Look at the aggression. This is not safe. Mom is not safe here alone with him." She reached into her oversized designer handbag, a bag I knew Marcus couldn't afford on his salary, and pulled out a glossy brochure. She slid it across the mahogany table toward me. It glided over the polished wood like a hockey puck. I looked down at it. Golden Horizon Senior Living, a place for peace, care and dignity. The cover showed an old couple sitting on a bench staring blankly at a fake pond. It looked like a prison with better landscaping. "What is this?" I asked. "It is a solution," Dad, Marcus said softly. It was the first time he had spoken. Emily took over. "We think it is time, Gus. This house, it is too much for you. It is 4 bedrooms. The stairs are dangerous. The maintenance is a nightmare. You are 72 years old. You shouldn't be worrying about gutters and lawns. You should be resting." She tapped the brochure with a long fingernail. "Golden Horizon has a memory care unit. Top of the line. They have doctors on staff 24/7. You would have your own studio apartment, meals provided, activities." "And Bernice," I asked, "does she go to the memory care unit too?" Emily laughed, a dismissive little sound. "Of course not. Mom is fine, but she can't take care of you and the house and her duties at the church. It is killing her, Gus. Look at her. She is exhausted." Bernice sniffled on cue. Emily continued, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "We have a plan. We move you to Golden Horizon next month. Mom stays here for a bit to sort through the clutter. You have so much junk, Gus, and then we sell the house. Sell the house. There it was. The crack in the foundation. The hidden stress fracture I had been looking for. This house was paid off. It was a Victorian restoration in a neighborhood that was gentrifying faster than a speeding bullet. It was worth at least $800,000, maybe $1 million in a bidding war. And the money, I asked. Where does the money go? Well, Emily said, talking faster now, excited. It pays for your care, obviously. Private nursing isn't cheap. And the rest? Well, Mom needs a smaller place, a condo near the church. And Marcus and I, we can help manage the rest of the assets. Manage. That is the favorite word of thieves in suits. I looked at Marcus. Is this what you want, son? You want to put your father in a home and sell the house you grew up in? Marcus looked down at his shoes. We have debts, Dad, he mumbled. And Emily, she has this idea. For a business, a chain of yoga studios. It is a great investment. We just need the capital. I felt a coldness settle in my chest. It wasn't heartbreak, it was clarity. They weren't worried about my health. They weren't worried about Bernice's safety. They were vultures circling a man they thought was already a carcass. Emily wanted her yoga studios. Marcus wanted to stop drowning in credit card debt. And Bernice wanted me out of the way so she could bring Reverend Thomas here. I could see it. I could see him parking his Porsche in my driveway. I could see him drinking my bourbon in my living room. They had formed an alliance, an unholy trinity of greed, lust, and cowardice. I looked at the brochure again. Golden Horizon. I looked at Emily. She was smiling now, thinking she had won. She thought I was a confused old man who would sign whatever paper she put in front of him just to make the shouting stop. She didn't know she was talking to Augustus Freeman. She didn't know that I had spent my life calculating load-bearing limits, and she had just exceeded hers. I picked up the brochure. I studied it for a moment, letting the silence stretch out. It looks expensive, I said quietly. Only the best for you, Dad, Emily said. I looked at Bernice. And you think this is best, Bernice? You want me to leave our home? Bernice looked up. Her eyes were dry now. They were hard and cold like marbles. I think it is God's will. Gus, she said. I think God is telling us that it is time for a new season. A season of peace. God's will. She used God like a rubber stamp for her treachery. I nodded slowly. I folded the brochure and put it in my pocket. I will think about it, I said. Emily clapped her hands. That is all we ask. Just think about it. I can set up a tour for Tuesday. The director is a friend of mine. I stood up from the table. My knees didn't pop this time. I felt strong. I am tired, I said. All this excitement. Maybe you are right, Emily. Maybe my mind is slipping. I need to rest. I walked toward the stairs. Good night, Gus, Bernice called out. Her voice was cheerful now. She had survived the dinner. She thought the danger had passed. I climbed the stairs to the guest room where I had been sleeping for the past 5 years. I closed the door and locked it. I didn't go to sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed and took out the brochure. I tore it in half. Then I tore it in half again. They wanted to play the game of mental incompetence. They wanted to declare me unfit so they could seize my assets. They wanted to use my own hard work to fund their affairs and their failed business dreams. Fine. If they wanted a crazy old man, I would give them a performance they would never forget. But first, I needed to see just how deep the rot went. I pulled my laptop out from under the bed. I opened it and logged into our joint bank account. Or rather, I tried to. Password incorrect. I tried again. My birthday. Bernice's birthday. Our anniversary. Password incorrect. Account access locked after 3 failed attempts. I sat back in the dark. Bernice hadn't just changed the password. She had locked me out of 40 years of savings. I looked at the digital clock on the nightstand. 8:00 p.m. Downstairs, I could hear them laughing. I heard the pop of a cork. It wasn't champagne. It sounded like the heavy, expensive thud of a cork from a bottle of Hennessy. They were drinking my evidence. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The streetlights were flickering. You want to sell my house, Emily? You want to steal my money, Bernice? You want to bury me, Marcus? I picked up my phone. I didn't call the bank. Not yet. I called a number I hadn't used in years. Saul, I whispered when the voice answered. It is Gus. Yes, Gus Freeman. Listen, old friend, I need a shark. No, not for bridge permits. I need a divorce lawyer. And Saul, I need one who knows how to gut a fish without getting blood on his suit. I hung up. The Alliance had made their move. They had shown their hand. Now it was my turn to shuffle the deck. And I was going to make sure that when the house of cards fell, I was the only one left standing. The morning sun did not bring clarity. It brought a headache and a silence so profound it felt like the house was holding its breath. Bernice had left early, claiming she had an emergency meeting with the choir director. I knew better. She was avoiding me. She was avoiding the questions she knew were simmering behind my eyes. I waited until her car turned the corner before I moved. I didn't go to the kitchen for coffee. I went straight to my study. I sat down at my desk, the heavy oak desk I had bought with my first big bonus in 1985. I opened my laptop. Last night the password had failed. But this morning I was prepared. I wasn't just a husband trying to log in. I was an investigator looking for a breach. I called the bank directly. I didn't use the automated system. I dialed the private client line, the one reserved for customers who had been with the bank for over 30 years. Mr. Freeman, the voice on the other end, chirped. A young woman named Sarah. How can I help you today, Sarah? I said, keeping my voice level. I seem to be locked out of my online banking. My password isn't working. Oh yes, Sarah said, the clicking of her keyboard audible in the background. It looks like the credentials were updated 3 days ago. By Mrs. Freeman. I closed my eyes. 3 days ago. The same day Emily supposedly started looking for nursing homes. It was a coordinated strike. I would like to reset them, please, I said. I am the primary account holder. We went through the security questions. My mother's maiden name, the name of my first pet. Bernice hadn't changed those. She couldn't erase my history even if she wanted to erase my future. Access granted. I logged in. The screen flickered, and then the numbers appeared. I scanned the summary. The checking account looked normal. The savings account was a little low, but nothing alarming. Then I clicked on the retirement fund. The 401k rollover. The nest egg I had spent 40 years building brick by brick, dollar by dollar. My breath hitched in my throat. There was a transaction dated 3 months ago. A withdrawal. $50,000. I stared at the number. $50,000. That wasn't a grocery bill. That wasn't a car repair. That was a year's salary for some people. I clicked on the transaction details. The beneficiary wasn't a casino. It wasn't a jewelry store. It was listed simply as charitable donation, St. Jude's Bell Tower Restoration Fund. I sat back in my chair. A bell tower. I closed the laptop. I stood up and walked to the window. I am a structural engineer. I know St. Jude's Church better than the architect who designed it. I consulted on the roof repair in 1998. I inspected the foundation in 2005. St. Jude's does not have a bell tower. It has a steeple, a wooden steeple that I personally inspected 6 months ago. It needed a coat of paint, maybe some shingle work. It certainly did not need a $50,000 restoration. And even if it did, there would be permits. There would be scaffolding. There would be cement mixers and crews. I grabbed my keys. I didn't take my sedan. I took my old pickup truck, the one I used for site visits. It felt appropriate. I wasn't going to church to pray. I was going to a job site. I was going to inspect a failure. The drive to the church took 15 minutes. My heart was pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. $50,000. Combined with the hotel receipt, the total was climbing. Bernice wasn't just skimming off the top. She was shoveling my life's work into a furnace. I pulled into the church parking lot. It was a Tuesday morning. The lot was mostly empty, save for the church van and the secretary's sedan. I looked up at the steeple. It stood there against the blue sky, quiet and undisturbed. There was no scaffolding. There were no workers. There wasn't even a ladder leaning against the siding. The white paint was peeling slightly on the north side, exactly as it had been 6 months ago. $50,000 for a ghost project. I drove around to the back of the church near the administrative offices. That is where the clergy parked. And there it was. Parked in the spot reserved for senior pastor, sitting on the asphalt like a sleek black shark, was a car that cost more than my first house. A Porsche Panamera, brand new. The dealer plates were still on it. I parked my truck next to it. My rusted Ford looked like a farm animal standing next to a spaceship. I got out and walked around the car. I looked through the window. Cream leather seats, walnut dashboard. It smelled of new money. I knew Reverend Thomas. He was 35 years old. He preached sermons about humility. He asked the congregation to tithe 10% of their income even when they were struggling to pay rent. And here he was, driving a machine that screamed vanity. Well, look who it is. Brother Gus. I turned around. Reverend Thomas was standing at the back door of the church. He was smiling that practiced megawatt smile that made the grandmothers in the front row swoon. He was wearing a tailored suit that fit him a little too perfectly, and on his wrist, glinting in the sunlight, was a gold Rolex. I looked at the watch, then I looked at the car, then I looked at the steeple. "Good morning, Reverend," I said. I was just admiring the vehicle. "God must be blessing you abundantly." Thomas laughed. He walked down the steps, his Italian loafers clicking on the pavement. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy and condescending. "The Lord provides, Gus. The Lord provides." It was a gift, actually, from a generous donor who wanted the shepherd to travel in safety, a donor. I looked him in the eye. I was also looking for the construction crew, Reverend. Bernice told me we donated $50,000 for the bell tower. I wanted to see how the work was coming along. As an engineer, you know. Thomas didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He was a professional liar. Yes, the bell tower," he said, his voice dropping to a somber, confidential tone. "We are in the planning phase, Gus. The permitting process in this city is a nightmare, as you know. The money is sitting safely in the escrow account waiting for the red tape to clear. We want to do it right." He squeezed my shoulder. "But Gus, while you are here," he leaned in closer, "Bernice is worried about you. We prayed for you this morning. She says you are having trouble distinguishing reality from fantasy. She says you have been aggressive." I felt the heat rise in my neck. He was doing it too. The gaslighting. "I am fine, Thomas," I said, shrugging his hand off. "Are you?" he asked, tilting his head. "Because coming here inspecting the grounds, asking about money, it sounds like obsession, Gus. It sounds like a man who is losing his grip." He stepped into my personal space, and that is when it hit me. The smell. It wasn't the smell of incense or old hymnals. It was a sharp, spicy cologne, sandalwood musk, and something expensive. My mind flashed back to Sunday morning, Bernice standing in the kitchen wearing her silk scarf. I had hugged her, trying to apologize before I found the bottle. Her scarf had smelled exactly like this. It wasn't her perfume. It was him. The scent of the man who was sleeping with my wife. The scent of the man who was driving a Porsche bought with my retirement money. The scent of the man who had eaten oysters in room 404 while I sat home alone. I looked at his Rolex again. I wondered if that was bought with the widow's mites or my 401k. "You should listen to your wife." Gus Thomas said, his voice smooth as oil. "She is a godly woman. She only wants what is best for your soul. Maybe it is time to slow down. Let the younger generation handle the burdens of the church and the finances." He smiled again, showing perfectly whitened teeth. "Go home, Gus. Rest. Let us handle the heavy lifting." He turned and walked back toward the church, checking his reflection in the window of the Porsche as he passed. I stood there in the parking lot, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. He thought he had won. He thought I was a confused old man who could be patted on the head and sent on his way. He thought his suit and his car and his title protected him. He was wrong. He had just made a fatal error. He had challenged a structural engineer to find a flaw. I looked at the bell tower one last time. Planning phase, my foot. I climbed back into my truck. I didn't start the engine immediately. I sat there breathing in the smell of old vinyl and gasoline, letting it purge the scent of his cologne from my nose. $50,000, a Porsche, a Rolex, and a lie about a tower that didn't exist. I had the receipt. Now I had the financial trail, but I needed more. I needed to catch them in the act. I needed to hear them say it. Thomas wanted me to go home and rest. Fine, I would go home, but I wouldn't be resting. I put the truck in gear. I wasn't driving home to sleep. I was driving to the electronics store. If they wanted to turn my living room into their conference room, I was going to make sure I had a front row seat. I pulled out of the lot, leaving the black Porsche gleaming in the sun. "Enjoy the ride, Reverend," I whispered, "because the road is about to run out." The best way to catch a rat is not to chase it with a broom. It is to leave the cheese out, turn off the lights, and wait. After my encounter with Reverend Thomas in the parking lot, I knew I couldn't outshout them. They had the numbers. They had the narrative. To them and to everyone in our circle, I was the angry, confused old man losing his grip on reality. If I kept fighting, if I kept accusing, I would only prove them right. I would be the madman ranting about conspiracies while they looked on with pity. So I decided to become exactly what they wanted me to be. I went home that afternoon and apologized. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I walked into the kitchen where Bernice was chopping vegetables with the aggression of a butcher, and I hung my head. "I am sorry, Bernice," I said, making my voice sound thin and wavering. I don't know what came over me at the church. Maybe Emily is right. Maybe I am confused. The stress of the house. It is getting to me. Bernice stopped chopping. She turned around, the knife still in her hand. She scrutinized me, looking for a crack in my performance, but I held it. I let my shoulders slump. I let my hands tremble just a little. "I am glad you are finally seeing reason, Gus," she said, her voice softening into that patronizing tone she used for children. "We only want what is best for you." I nodded. "I think I need to clear my head," I said. "I am going to go fishing tomorrow, just for the day. I need to sit by the water and think about the transition, about the nursing home." Her eyes lit up. I saw the relief wash over her. If I was gone for the day, the house would be empty. The house would be safe for her visitors. "That sounds like a wonderful idea, Gus," she said, almost smiling. "You go. Take the truck. I will hold down the fort here." The trap was set. Now I needed the eyes. I didn't go to a fancy spy shop. I went to a local electronics store in a strip mall 3 towns over where nobody knew my face. I found what I was looking for in the home security aisle. A nanny cam. But not just a black box. This one was hidden inside a plush teddy bear. It looked innocent. It looked like a toy you would buy for a grandchild. I bought it with cash. When I got home, Bernice was in the shower. I moved quickly. I took the bear into the living room. I placed it on the bookshelf right next to the collection of encyclopedias we hadn't opened in 20 years. It sat there staring out at the room with its glass button eyes. One eye was plastic. The other was a high-definition lens with a microphone sensitive enough to hear a pin drop. I downloaded the app to my phone. I synced the camera. The image popped up on my screen, a wide-angle view of the living room, crystal clear. I felt a surge of adrenaline. It was the same feeling I used to get before a building inspection, knowing I was about to find the flaw that everyone else had missed. The next morning, I packed my fishing gear. I made a show of it. I loaded the cooler, the rods, the tackle box. Bernice watched me from the porch, sipping her coffee, waving goodbye like a dutiful wife. "Drive safe, Gus," she called out. "Don't worry about coming home early. Take your time." I drove the truck down the street. I turned the corner. But I didn't go to the lake. I drove 3 blocks over to the parking lot of a 24-hour diner. I parked in the back where my truck was hidden by a dumpster. I reclined the seat. I pulled out my tablet. I connected to the bear. I waited. It didn't take long. At 10:15 a.m., less than an hour after I left the front door of my house opened. On the screen, I saw Bernice. She wasn't wearing her church clothes. She was wearing a silk robe I had bought her for Christmas 10 years ago, a robe she told me she didn't like because it was too revealing. She had a glass of wine in her hand. She walked to the window and checked the driveway, making sure I was truly gone. Then she unlocked the front door. A moment later, he walked in. Reverend Thomas. He wasn't wearing his collar. He was wearing a polo shirt and jeans, looking like a man ready for a relaxing day off. He walked in with the confidence of a homeowner. Bernice threw her arms around his neck. They kissed. It wasn't a peck on the cheek. It was a hungry, desperate kiss that made my stomach turn. I had to look away from the screen for a moment, fighting the urge to throw the tablet through the windshield. When I looked back, they were moving to the sofa I had paid for, the sofa where I had read bedtime stories to Marcus. Thomas sat down and put his feet up on the coffee table. He laughed, a loud booming sound that the bear's microphone picked up perfectly. "The old fool is gone?" Thomas asked. "Gone fishing," Bernice said, handing him a glass. She reached under the coffee table and pulled out a bottle. My heart hammered. It was the Hennessy, the bottle from the garage, the evidence she claimed she was going to dispose of. She poured a generous amount into his glass. "He thinks he is losing his mind," Bernice said, sitting next to him and resting her head on his shoulder. Emily did a great job scaring him with the dementia talk. He was apologizing to me yesterday. It was pathetic. Thomas swirled the cognac in his glass. Pathetic or not, we need him to sign those papers, Bernice. We are running out of time. I turned up the volume on my tablet. This was it. This was the conversation I needed. Why the rush, baby? Bernice asked, running her hand through his hair. I thought we had a few months. Thomas sat up straighter. He took a long drink of the $1,500 liquor. I got a call from the diocese yesterday, he said. His voice was tense. The bishop is sending an external auditor next month, a real hard-ass from New York. They are doing a surprise review of all the parish discretionary funds in the district. Bernice gasped. Next month, but the ledger isn't balanced. I know, Thomas snapped. That is why I'm here. We are short, Bernice. We are short about $100,000. Between the car, the trips, the lifestyle expenses, the hole is too big to hide with creative accounting. He looked at her, his eyes desperate. If that auditor opens the books and sees the missing cash before we replace it, I am going to jail. And so are you. You signed the checks as the treasurer of the women's ministry. Bernice stood up. She began to pace the room, the silk robe fluttering around her. 100,000, she muttered. We can't raise that with bake sales, Thomas. That is why we need the house, Thomas shouted. He stood up and grabbed her shoulders. We need Gus to sign the power of attorney to Emily or Marcus. Once they have control, they can list the house. In this market, this place is worth $1 million easy. We take a loan from the sale proceeds, just $100,000 to plug the hole in the church account, and nobody goes to prison. Bernice looked at him. But Marcus, he wants the money for Emily's yoga business. Thomas laughed. Screw the yoga business. We tell Marcus that the house sold for less than expected. Or we tell him there were tax liens. Marcus is an idiot, Bernice. He does whatever Emily says, and Emily does whatever you say. We take our cut first. We save our skins. Then we ship Gus off to the nursing home and live happily ever after. Bernice nodded slowly. A cruel smile spread across her face. You are right, she said. Gus is the key. If we can get him declared incompetent or get him to sign over control voluntarily, we control the equity. She picked up her glass and raised it to him. To the old fool, she said. May he enjoy his fishing trip. Because when he comes back, his life is over. Thomas clinked his glass against hers. To the old fool, he repeated. And to us. They drank. I sat in my truck staring at the screen. My hands were shaking, but this time it wasn't from rage. It was from the cold realization of the truth. They weren't just sinners. They were criminals. They had embezzled over $100,000 from the church. They had stolen the offerings of widows and pensioners to buy Porsches and luxury hotel suites. And now they were planning to liquidate my life's work, my home, my legacy to cover their tracks before the auditor arrived. I hit the record button on the screen, saving the clip to the cloud. I saved it twice. Then I emailed it to a secure folder. I watched them for a few more minutes. They started talking about the Jubilee celebration coming up, about how they would stand on stage and be honored as pillars of the community. They laughed about the irony. I turned off the tablet. I sat in the silence of the truck cab. Outside, the world was going on as usual. People were buying coffee. People were pumping gas. But inside my world, the war had just begun. They needed me to sign the papers. They needed me to be the confused, compliant old man. Fine. I would give them exactly what they wanted. I would dangle the signature in front of them like a carrot. I would make them think they were inches away from salvation. And then when they reached for it, I would snap the trap shut. I started the engine. I wasn't going fishing. I was going to see Saul. Bernice wanted to drink to the old fool. Well, I hoped she enjoyed that Hennessy, because it was the last expensive drink she was going to have for a very, very long time. I pulled out of the parking lot. The sun was shining brighter now. The headache was gone. I knew the load-bearing limit of their lies, and I had just found the sledgehammer. Wednesday arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Bernice had left the house early again, presumably to pray with Reverend Thomas, leaving the stage set for the second act of their conspiracy. I was sitting in my armchair reading a book on thermodynamics. Not because I needed to learn it, but because the logic of physics calmed me. In physics, every action has a reaction. In my family, every action had a hidden agenda. At 2 o'clock sharp, a car pulled into the driveway. It wasn't Marcus's sedan. It was a white BMW SUV, the kind that looks like it belongs in a rap video or a country club parking lot. Emily stepped out. She was wearing a power suit, baby blue, sharp shoulders, and holding a clipboard. Following her was a man I had never seen before. He was tall, thin, and wore a suit that was too shiny. He carried a leather briefcase and walked with the self-importance of a man who charges by the minute. I didn't get up. I let them ring the doorbell. I let them wait. When I finally opened the door, Emily breezed past me without a hello, bringing a gust of expensive perfume and cold ambition into my hallway. "Gus," she said, not looking at me. "I brought a friend. This is Dr. Aris. He is a specialist." The man extended a hand. His grip was limp like a wet fish. "Mr. Freeman," he said. His voice was oily. "Emily has told me so much about you. I was in the neighborhood and thought I would stop by for a friendly chat." A friendly chat. With a specialist. In a suit. At 2 in the afternoon. I looked at Emily. She was already in the living room moving a stack of magazines off the coffee table to make room for the doctor's briefcase. "What is your specialty, doctor?" I asked, closing the door. "Structural engineering, plumbing. Because unless you are here to fix the leak in the upstairs bathroom, I don't know what we have to chat about." Dr. Aris chuckled. It was a practiced, condescending sound. "I specialize in geriatric cognitive health. Mr. Freeman. Memory. Mental acuity. The aging brain." "I see," I said. "So you are a shrink." Emily spun around. "Don't be rude, Gus. Dr. Aris is doing us a favor. We just want to see how you are doing. You know, after the incident in the garage and the aggressive behavior at Sunday dinner." She sat down on the sofa, crossing her legs. She patted the cushion next to her, signaling the doctor to sit. "Please, Gus, sit down," Dr. Aris said, opening his briefcase. "It is just a conversation. No needles, no tests, just talking." I sat in my armchair directly across from them. I made sure to position myself so that the teddy bear on the bookshelf behind me had a perfect view of the doctor's face. Dr. Aris pulled out a file folder. He clicked a gold pen. So, Augustus, he began using my full name like a school principal. "Let's start with the basics. Can you tell me what day it is?" I looked at him. I looked at Emily. She was leaning forward, her eyes hungry for a mistake. "It is Wednesday," I said. "Very good," the doctor said, as if I were a toddler who just used the potty. "And the year?" "It is 2024, I said. "And who is the President of the United States?" I leaned back in my chair. "Is this the test?" I asked. Because if knowing the president is the benchmark for sanity, half the country might be in trouble, depending on who you ask. Emily sighed loudly. "He is being difficult, doctor. This is what I was talking about. Deflection. Aggression." Dr. Aris held up a hand to silence her. "Mr. Freeman, humor me. Do you know where you are?" "I am in the house I bought in 1980. I said, my voice hardening. "I am sitting on a floor whose joists I reinforced myself 10 years ago. I am under a roof that I paid for by working 60-hour weeks." Dr. Aris scribbled something on his notepad. He didn't look impressed. "And how have you been sleeping?" "Emily says you wander at night, that you talk to people who aren't there." "I don't wander," I said. "I patrol. There are thieves in this neighborhood." "Thieves?" Dr. Aris asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," I said, looking directly at Emily. "Thieves who try to steal inheritances. Thieves who try to sell houses that don't belong to them." Emily gasped. "See paranoia? He thinks everyone is stealing from him. He accused Mom of stealing church money." Dr. Aris nodded gravely. He wrote for a long time. The scratching of his pen was the only sound in the room. "Mr. Freeman, I am going to say 3 words. I want you to repeat them back to me in 5 minutes. Apple, penny, table." I stared at him. Apple, penny, table. The standard cognitive test. It was insulting. I sat there in silence. The clock on the wall ticked. Emily checked her watch. She looked bored. She pulled out her phone and started typing, probably updating Marcus on the progress of my diagnosis. Suddenly, Dr. Aris stood up. "Excuse me," he said. "I had a large coffee on the way over. Could I use your restroom?" "Of course," Emily said, standing up. "It is down the hall, second door on the left." Dr. Aris placed his folder on the coffee table and walked down the hallway. Emily's phone rang. She looked at the screen. "I have to take this," she muttered. "It is the yoga studio contractor." She walked into the kitchen, answering the phone with a hushed, urgent whisper. I was alone in the room. The folder was sitting on the table. I knew I only had seconds. I leaned forward. I didn't touch it at first. I listened. I heard the bathroom door click shut. I heard Emily arguing about flooring prices in the kitchen. I reached out and flipped the folder open. I expected to see notes. I expected to see scribbles about my aggression or paranoia. But that is not what I found. The top document was a medical certificate, a certificate of incapacity. I scanned the text. My heart stopped beating for a moment. Patient name, Augustus Freeman. Diagnosis, advanced dementia, Alzheimer's type. Severe cognitive decline. Patient lacks the capacity to make financial or medical decisions. Recommendation: immediate transfer to a secure memory care facility. Transfer of power of attorney to next of kin recommended immediately. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. It wasn't just a diagnosis. It was a death sentence for my freedom. But then I saw the date at the bottom, the date next to Dr. Aris's signature. It was dated yesterday. I stared at the ink. It was blue. It was signed. It was notarized. He hadn't evaluated me. He hadn't listened to a word I said today. The verdict had been written before he even stepped foot in my house. He wasn't a doctor. He was a hitman with a stethoscope. Emily must have paid him off to come here and act out a play just to make it look official for the neighbors or the judge. Apple, penny, table. It was all theater. I heard the toilet flush. I quickly flipped the folder closed and sat back in my chair. My hands were shaking not from age but from a rage so pure it felt like white heat. They weren't just going to steal my money. They were going to erase me. They were going to lock me in a room and drug me until I actually did lose my mind, just so they could sell my house to pay for a yoga studio and a Porsche. Emily walked back in from the kitchen, looking annoyed. Dr. Aris returned from the hallway, adjusting his tie. "Sorry about that," Dr. Aris said, sitting back down. "Now, Mr. Freeman, those 3 words. Can you repeat them?" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had signed away my life yesterday for a check. I could have recited them. I could have told him apple penny table. I could have recited the Gettysburg Address backwards. But I realized something. If I passed the test, they wouldn't stop. They would just find another doctor. They would try a different angle. They would claim I was violent. But if I failed, if I gave them exactly what they wanted, they would get sloppy. They would think the game was won. They would move forward with their plan to sell the house, and that is when I would catch them. I looked Dr. Aris in the eye. I let my jaw go slack. I let my eyes wander around the room unfocused. Words I asked, my voice trembling. What words? Emily lit up. She literally sat on the edge of her seat. The words he just told you, Gus. Apple, something, table. I shook my head. "I don't know," I muttered. I want to go fishing. Where's my tackle box?" Bernice said I could go fishing. Dr. Aris smiled. A predatory, satisfied smile. He picked up his pen and made a final check mark on the paper inside the folder, the paper that was already signed. "I think we have seen enough, Emily," he said softly. "The short-term memory loss is significant. The confusion about time and place. It is classic progression." He stood up. "I will file the official report by tomorrow morning. You should have the power of attorney paperwork ready for the judge by Friday." Emily stood up and shook his hand vigorously. "Thank you, doctor. Thank you for being so patient with him. It is just so hard for the family." She looked at me with fake sadness. "Poor Gus. He just isn't there anymore." They walked to the door. I stayed in my chair. "Goodbye, Mr. Freeman," Dr. Aris called out. I didn't answer. I waited until the door closed. I waited until I heard the BMW start up and drive away. Then I stood up. I walked to the window and watched them leave. Apple, penny, table. I remembered the words, and I would remember this day. I walked over to the bookshelf. I picked up the teddy bear. I checked the recording. The camera had caught everything. It had caught the doctor leaving the room. It had caught me opening the folder. It had caught the clear shot of the pre-signed document. I had proof of medical fraud. I had proof of conspiracy. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady now. They thought I was broken. They thought I was a confused old man who wanted to go fishing. Well, they were half right. I was going fishing. But I wasn't fishing for bass. I was fishing for sharks. And I had just put the perfect bait on the hook. I pulled out my phone and called Saul. "Start drafting the papers, Saul," I said, "and find out if Dr. Aris has a malpractice insurance policy, because I am going to own his practice by the time this is over." I hung up. The evaluation was complete, but the diagnosis was wrong. I wasn't losing my mind. I was just getting ready to use it. Thursday night was humid, the kind of Chicago night where the air sticks to your skin like a wet sheet. Bernice had spent the entire day being unusually solicitous. She had made my favorite cornbread for dinner, the kind with the jalapenos, and she had asked about my fishing trip 3 separate times, nodding along as I spun a tale about catching a 10-pound bass that didn't exist. "Gus," she said, wiping the table after dinner with a little more vigor than necessary, "I have to go to the church tonight. We are having a prayer vigil for the Jubilee. It is going to be late. Don't wait up for me." I watched her put on her coat. She checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, applying a fresh coat of lipstick. Red, not a color usually worn for solemn prayer vigils. "I will leave the porch light on for you," I said. As soon as her taillights disappeared down the street, I was in my truck. I didn't turn on my headlights until I was 2 blocks away. I knew exactly where she was going. The camera in the teddy bear had given me the motive, and the bank statements had given me the timeline, but now I needed the method. I needed to see the crime with my own eyes. I parked my truck in the alley behind the strip mall adjacent to the church. It was a spot used by delivery drivers, hidden from the main road by a row of overflowing dumpsters. I walked the rest of the way, sticking to the shadows of the oak trees that lined the property. St. Jude's at night was usually a fortress of solitude, a quiet beacon in the neighborhood. But tonight there was a single light burning. It wasn't in the sanctuary. It wasn't in the fellowship hall. It was in the administrative wing. Specifically, it was in the senior pastor's office. I crept through the bushes that lined the east wall. My knees protested aching in the damp air. Arthritis is a cruel reminder of age, but adrenaline is a powerful painkiller. I ignored the stiffness and pushed through the holly bushes, scratching my hands on the thorns. I reached the window. It was high set, about 6 feet off the ground, but there was an old industrial air conditioning unit sitting just beneath it. I pulled myself up. I grunted with the effort, feeling the strain in my shoulders, but I managed to get a foothold on the metal casing. I steadied myself against the brick wall. The blinds were drawn, but they were cheap plastic vertical blinds. One slat was bent near the bottom, leaving a triangular gap just wide enough for a camera lens or an old man's eye. I peered inside. The office was plush. It didn't look like a place for spiritual counseling. It looked like a law firm or a hedge fund manager's den. There were leather chairs that probably cost more than my first car, mahogany bookshelves filled with books that looked like they had never been opened, and a thick Persian rug covering the floor. Reverend Thomas was sitting behind his massive desk. He looked agitated. He was running his hands through his hair, destroying his perfect coiffure. His tie was loosened, hanging around his neck like a noose. Bernice was standing by the wall behind him. She was facing a large painting of the Last Supper. I watched as she reached out and swung the painting away from the wall on a hidden hinge. Behind Jesus and the disciples sat a wall safe. The irony was so thick it almost made me laugh out loud. They were hiding their theft behind the image of the ultimate sacrifice. I watched as she spun the dial. She didn't need to look at a piece of paper. She knew the combination by heart. Her fingers moved with the dexterity of a safecracker. She opened the heavy steel door. She reached inside. She didn't pull out prayer books or communion wine. She pulled out stacks of cash, thick bundles of bills wrapped in rubber bands. I knew what that money was. That was the weekly offering. That was the tithe from Mrs. Johnson, who lived on Social Security. That was the crumpled $5 bills from the teenagers in the youth group. That was the money meant for the soup kitchen and the winter coat drive. She carried the money to the desk and dumped it in front of Thomas. "Here," she said. Her voice was muffled through the double-paned glass, but I was close enough to hear the words clearly. "That is $5,000 from the building fund and another $3 from the benevolence offering. It is not much, but it will cover the minimum payment on the credit card." Thomas grabbed the money. He didn't count it. He just shoved it into a leather duffel bag sitting on his desk. "It is not enough, Bernice," he hissed. "The auditor is coming in 3 weeks. We need the big money. We need the house money." Bernice walked around the desk. She put her hands on his shoulders and began to massage them. I saw the tension leave his body under her touch. "I told you, Thomas," she said soothingly. "It is handled. Dr. Aris signed the certificate yesterday. Emily is filing the paperwork tomorrow. By Monday, Augustus will be in Golden Horizon." I felt my breath catch in my throat. Hearing it confirmed, hearing my name spoken with such casual malice was like a physical blow. "By Tuesday," she continued, "the house will be listed. I already have a cash buyer lined up, a developer who wants to tear it down and build condos. Tear it down, my house, the house where I reinforced the joists, the house where I built the deck, the house where I raised my son. They were going to bulldoze 40 years of my life to cover a credit card bill. She leaned down and kissed the top of his head. Don't worry, baby. As soon as I dump Augustus in that facility, I am free. I will sell the house for whatever we can get quickly. The money is yours. Or rather, ours. Thomas stood up. He turned and pulled her into an embrace. He kissed her hard. It wasn't a friendly peck. It was a hungry, desperate kiss, his hands roaming over her back, pulling her hips against his. You are a genius, Bernice, he murmured against her lips. I don't know what I would do without you. You would be in jail, she laughed breathily. But we are in this together. Just a few more days. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. My hand was shaking. It wasn't shaking from fear. It was shaking from a rage so deep, so hot, it felt like magma moving under the earth of my soul. For 40 years I had worked. I had paid the bills. I had been faithful. I had been the steady, boring engineer who made sure the walls didn't fall down. And this woman who shared my bed, who bore my son, who prayed over our meals, was selling me out for a man half her age who treated the church like his personal piggy bank. She wasn't just stealing my money. She was stealing my dignity. She was planning to lock me away in a room with white walls and pretend I didn't exist so she could play Bonnie and Clyde with a man of the cloth. I pressed the phone against the glass. I hit record. I filmed them counting the stolen money. I filmed them embracing. I filmed Bernice laughing about dumping me like a bag of trash. I made sure to get a clear shot of the open safe and the stacks of cash on the desk. I filmed until they turned off the lights. I filmed until they walked out of the office arm in arm, laughing about their plan. I stayed on the air conditioning unit for a long time after the light went out. I waited until I heard their cars start in the parking lot. I waited until the sound of Thomas's Porsche and Bernice's sedan faded into the distance. I climbed down. My legs were stiff and cold. I walked back to the alley, moving like a ghost through the darkness. I sat in the driver's seat of my truck. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there in the dark, clutching my phone. I looked at the video one more time. The image of Bernice opening the safe was crisp and clear. I had the smoking gun. I had the evidence that would send them both to prison for a decade. But I wasn't going to fire it yet. I had one more person to see, one last chance to salvage something from the wreckage of my family. Marcus. My son. He was weak, I knew that. He was led by his nose by Emily, but he was still my blood. I had to know if he was truly part of this. Did he know his mother was stealing? Did he know his inheritance was being funneled into a Porsche? Or was he just a pawn blinded by his wife's ambition? If he was innocent, I would save him. I would pull him out of the fire before I burned the house down. But if he was guilty, if he knew, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. If he knew, then he would go down with the ship. I started the truck. The engine roared to life, shattering the silence of the alley. It was midnight. The prayer vigil was over. But my judgment day was just beginning. I put the truck in gear and drove out of the shadows. I wasn't Augustus, the retired engineer, anymore. I was the demolition expert, and the explosives were set. Friday morning dawned gray and heavy, the kind of Chicago sky that threatens snow but only delivers a bone-chilling dampness. I sat in a booth at the back of a coffee shop on 47th Street, a place where the espresso machine hissed loud enough to cover a private conversation. I arrived 30 minutes early. I needed the time. I needed to look at the video on my phone one last time to remind myself that I wasn't the villain in this story. I was a father about to put his son on trial. When you raise a child, you build a structure. You pour the foundation of values, you frame the walls with discipline, and you put a roof of love over their head. You hope that when the storms come, the structure holds. But as I sat there stirring a black coffee that had gone cold, I was terrified that I was about to find out the building I had spent 40 years constructing was condemned. Marcus walked in at 10 o'clock sharp. He looked terrible. His eyes were red-rimmed and he had cut himself shaving. He wore a suit that was too tight in the shoulders, a remnant of the lifestyle Emily demanded but he couldn't afford. He scanned the room looking nervous like a man expecting a subpoena. When he saw me, he didn't smile. He just slumped his shoulders and walked over. "Dad," he said, sliding into the booth. "I don't have much time. Emily has me meeting with a commercial realtor at noon. We are looking at a space for the studio." He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask if I had slept. He just launched straight into the business that required my death, social or physical, to fund. "Sit down, Marcus," I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. He sat. He signaled the waitress for a water. He didn't order coffee. He couldn't afford the jitters. "Look, Dad." He started leaning in. "I know the evaluation with Dr. Aris was rough, but it is for the best. Golden Horizon is a great facility." Emily says, "Stop," I said. I didn't shout. I just dropped the word like a heavy stone on the table. Marcus froze. "I am not here to talk about nursing homes, Marcus. And I am not here to talk about Emily. I am here to talk about you and me and the truth." I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I placed it face down on the table. "Marcus," I asked, looking him dead in the eye, "do you love your mother?" He blinked. "Of course." "What kind of question is that? Do you trust her?" "Yeah, Dad. She is Mom. She is the head of the women's ministry. She is Mom." I nodded. "And what about me?" I asked. "Do you trust me?" Marcus looked away. He picked at a loose thread on the vinyl seat. "Dad, you know I do. But you have been different lately. The paranoia, the garage incident. It is hard to trust your judgment right now." I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment of truth. "I am going to show you something, son. And after you see it, I want you to make a choice. Not a choice about a nursing home. A choice about who you are." I picked up the phone. I unlocked it. I opened the video file from Thursday night, the video of the safe. The video of Bernice handing stacks of stolen cash to Reverend Thomas. I didn't show him the kissing. I didn't show him the affair. That was too much pain for one morning. I just showed him the theft. I wanted to see if his morality was intact before I tested his heart. I turned the screen toward him and pressed play. "Watch," I commanded. Marcus looked at the screen. At first, he looked confused. He squinted at the grainy footage of the pastor's office. Then he saw Bernice. He saw the safe open. He saw the money. The color drained from his face. It didn't happen slowly. It happened all at once, leaving him as gray as the sky outside. He watched the whole clip. He watched his mother dump the cash on the desk. He heard Thomas say, "We are short about $100,000. He heard Bernice say, "As soon as I dump Augustus in that facility, I am free." The video ended. The screen went black. Marcus didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared at the blank phone as if it were a bomb that had just detonated. I waited. I waited for the outrage. I waited for him to say, "Oh my God, Dad, she is stealing. We have to call the police." I waited for him to reach across the table and grab my hand. But the silence stretched on. And with every second that passed, a cold knot tightened in my stomach. Finally, Marcus looked up. His eyes weren't filled with shock. They were filled with fear. But not fear for me. "Dad," he whispered. "Who else has seen this?" "Nobody," I said. "Just me. And now you." He let out a shaky breath. He looked around the coffee shop, checking to see if anyone was listening. "You have to delete it," he said. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. "Excuse me," I asked. "You have to delete it, Dad," he said, his voice rising in panic. "You can't show this to anyone. Do you know what this would do? It would destroy Mom. It would destroy the church. It would destroy the church," I repeated, incredulous. "Marcus, she is embezzling. She is stealing from the collection plate to pay for God knows what. She is planning to lock me up to cover her tracks." Marcus reached across the table and grabbed my hand. His grip was clammy. "Dad, listen to me. Mom, she has been under a lot of pressure. Maybe it is a loan. Maybe she is investing the money for the church and she just cut some corners. Investing." I pulled my hand away. "In what?" "A Porsche for the pastor." "Marcus, listen to yourself. You are defending a crime." "I am not defending it," he hissed. "I am trying to survive it." He leaned back, running his hands over his face. "Dad, you don't understand. Emily, she is counting on the inheritance. She is counting on the house sale. We are in debt, up to our eyeballs. If you expose Mom, if you send her to jail, the assets get frozen. The house gets tied up in litigation. We get nothing." I stared at him. The structure had collapsed. The foundation was rotten. "So that is it," I said softly. "It is about the money. It is about my life, Marcus shouted, causing a woman at the next table to look over. He lowered his voice. Dad, Emily will leave me, she told me. If I don't come up with the capital for the studios this month, she is done. She says I am a loser. She says I can't provide. If this scandal breaks, if the family name is dragged through the mud and the money disappears, she is gone. He looked at me with pleading eyes. Eyes that used to look at me with admiration when I fixed his bicycle. Please, Dad, just let it go. Go to Golden Horizon. It is a nice place. Mom will sell the house. She will pay back the church money before the audit. Nobody gets hurt. And I can save my marriage. I looked at the man sitting across from me. He looked like Marcus. He sounded like Marcus. But he wasn't my son. My son would never ask his father to walk into a prison to save a thief. My son would never trade his father's dignity for a yoga studio. This was a stranger. A weak, desperate stranger shaped by a greedy wife and a manipulative mother. You know, I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. I came here today thinking I was going to save you. I thought you were a pawn, Marcus. I thought they were lying to you. I picked up my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. But you aren't a pawn. You are an accomplice. Dad, don't say that, Marcus whimpered. You are willing to let your mother steal, and you are willing to let her lock me away just so you can keep a woman who doesn't love you and buy things you don't need. I stood up. I placed a $20 bill on the table for the coffee he hadn't touched. Dad, where are you going? Marcus asked, standing up halfway. Are you going to the police? I looked down at him. I am going to finish what I started, I said. Dad, please. Think about the family. I looked him up and down from his desperate eyes to his cheap shoes. I am thinking about the family, Marcus. I am thinking about the family I thought I had. I turned to walk away. Dad, he called out, if you do this, if you ruin us, I will never forgive you. I stopped. I didn't turn around. I spoke to the air in front of me. That is fine, Marcus, because I don't have a son to forgive me anymore. I walked out of the coffee shop into the cold wind. The dampness hit my face, but I didn't feel it. I felt numb. I had lost my wife to a preacher. I had lost my son to a checkbook. I walked to my truck. I unlocked the door. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at the empty passenger seat where Marcus used to sit when he was a boy, holding the toolbox while we went to job sites. I let one tear fall. Just one. It was hot and heavy, burning a trail down my cheek. I wiped it away with the back of my hand. That was it. That was the last tear I would shed for them. I started the engine. They wanted a war. They wanted to sacrifice me for their sins. Fine. I checked the time. It was Friday. The Jubilee was in 2 days. I had the video. I had the bank records. And now I had the freedom of a man with nothing left to lose. I put the truck in gear. Marcus had made his choice. Now I was going to make mine. And unlike him, I wasn't going to hide in the dark. I was going to turn on every single light in the house and watch the roaches run. The office of Saul Berkowitz was not located in a glass skyscraper downtown. It was tucked away in a brownstone on the north side, a place that smelled of old leather cigar smoke and 50 years of legal warfare. Saul and I had played poker together every Thursday night for a decade, until Bernice made me stop claiming gambling was a sin. She didn't mind spending the church's money on gambling, apparently, but my $20 buy-in was an abomination. Saul was a shark. He was 70 years old, wore suspenders, and had a mind like a steel trap. He didn't look at the law as a set of rules. He looked at it as a weapon. I sat across from his messy desk, my phone connected to his large monitor. I played the video from the pastor's office, then I played the recording from the teddy bear. Then I showed him the bank statements. Saul watched in silence. He chewed on the end of an unlit cigar, his eyes narrowing behind his thick glasses. When the video of Bernice opening the safe ended, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long, low whistle. Gus, he said, his voice gravelly, I have handled messy divorces. I have handled fraud. But this is a masterpiece of stupidity. He pointed at the screen. Your wife isn't just cheating on you. She is running a criminal enterprise, embezzlement, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud. If we take this to the district attorney, she isn't just losing the house. She is going to prison for 10 to 15 years. And the pretty boy pastor is going with her. I nodded. I knew that. But I didn't just want them in jail. I wanted my life back. I wanted my dignity back. So what do we do, Saul, I asked. Do I file for divorce today? Do I lock her out of the house? Saul shook his head. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. No, he said firmly. If you file today, she goes into defense mode. She lawyers up. She hides the rest of the money. She claims the videos were obtained illegally or manipulated. It becomes a dogfight, and she will fight for half the assets. In Illinois, she is entitled to equity unless we can prove she dissipated marital assets on the affair. He tapped the desk with his finger. We have proof, but we need the kill shot. We need to catch them in the act of trying to steal the house. We need them to think they have won. He opened his drawer and pulled out a fresh legal pad. You said they want you to sign a power of attorney, he asked. Yes, I replied. Emily has the paperwork drawn up. They want control so they can sell the house next week. Good Saul said, a wicked smile spreading across his face. Let them have it. I frowned. You want me to give them my house? No, Saul said. I want you to give them a piece of paper that looks like you are giving them the house. He started writing furiously. I am going to draft a document. It will look like a standard durable power of attorney. It will have all the legal jargon. It will look official. But in the fine print in the clauses they won't bother to read because they are too arrogant. We will include a springing clause. This clause requires 2 independent medical evaluations, not just one from their hired quack to become active. And we will add a revocation clause that triggers immediately upon any attempt to sell real property without your written consent. He looked up at me. Basically, Gus, it is a dummy switch. It gives them 0 power. But they won't know that. They will think they have the keys to the kingdom. They will list the house. They will move the money. And when they do, they will be committing documented real estate fraud. He paused, looking at me with concern. But to make this work, Gus, you have to sell it. You have to go home and play the defeated man. You have to make them believe you are broken. Can you do that? I thought about Marcus in the coffee shop. I thought about the way he had looked at me and chosen his wife's greed over his father's life. Something inside me had snapped then, but it had also hardened. I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was cold. I can do it, I said. I have been practicing for 40 years. I pretended to be happy in a marriage that was empty. Pretending to be sad will be easy. Saul printed the documents. He put them in a plain manila envelope. One more thing, he said as he handed them to me. Don't sign them immediately. Make them wait. Make it a negotiation. It makes the surrender look more real. I took the envelope. The Jubilee, I said. Saul raised an eyebrow. The what? The church Jubilee. It is this Sunday. Bernice is being honored as the Woman of the Year. It is the biggest event of the decade for them. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I will tell them I will sign. But I want to attend the Jubilee as a free man. I will tell them I will go to the nursing home on Monday morning. Saul laughed. It was a bark of approval. You are a cruel man, Augustus Freeman. I like it. Let them have their party. And then, drop the hammer. I left Saul's office with the envelope tucked under my arm. It felt heavy like a weapon. I drove home slowly. The afternoon sun was fading, casting long shadows across the lawns of my neighborhood. I pulled into the driveway. Bernice's car was there. Emily's BMW was there. Marcus's sedan was there. The vultures were gathering. They were waiting for me to come home from my meeting with Marcus, expecting me to be broken by my son's betrayal. I sat in the truck for a moment. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I mussed my hair. I unbuttoned the top button of my shirt. I let my face go slack, pulling the corners of my mouth down. I stepped out of the truck. I walked up the path to the front door, dragging my feet. I opened the door. They were all in the living room. It looked like an intervention. Bernice was sitting in the armchair, my armchair. Emily was pacing. Marcus was sitting on the sofa, his head in his hands. When I walked in, they all stopped. The silence was absolute. Dad, Marcus whispered. He looked terrified. He thought I was going to explode. He thought I was going to tell them I knew everything. I didn't look at him. I looked at Bernice. I walked to the center of the room and dropped the manila envelope on the coffee table. It landed with a slap that echoed in the quiet house. I am tired, Bernice, I said. My voice was raspy, broken. Bernice looked at the envelope, then at me. Her eyes narrowed, suspicious. Where have you been, Gus? Marcus said you stormed out of the coffee shop. I was driving, I said. I drove around the city. I looked at the buildings I helped build, and I realized maybe I am done building. I sat down on the sofa as far away from Marcus as possible. I let out a long, shuddering sigh. You win, Emily. Emily stopped pacing. She looked at me, her eyes widening. What she asked? I pointed to the envelope. I went to a notary. Those are the papers, the power of attorney. I had a lawyer draft them up to make sure they were correct. Emily lunged for the envelope. She tore it open and pulled out the documents. She scanned them quickly. She saw the words, durable power of attorney. She saw my name. She saw the spaces for signatures. She didn't read the fine print. She didn't look at page 4. She just saw the victory. Oh, Gus, Bernice said, standing up and walking over to me. She put a hand on my shoulder. I flinched, but I didn't pull away. You are doing the right thing. It is for your own good. I looked up at her. I have conditions, I said. Bernice's smile faltered. Conditions? Yes, I said. I will sign them, but not today. Emily's face fell. Why not? We can do it right now. No, I said firmly. I want one last weekend. In my house. In my community. I stood up and walked to the fireplace, looking at the family photos on the mantel, photos of a life that was a lie. The Jubilee is Sunday, I said. I want to go. I want to see you honored, Bernice. I want to see the church one last time. I turned to face them. I will sign the papers on Sunday night after the party. And on Monday morning, I will go to Golden Horizon. I looked at Marcus. I won't fight you anymore. I just want peace. The room was silent for a heartbeat. I saw Bernice and Emily exchange a glance. They were doing the math. Sunday night. That was only 48 hours away. They could wait 48 hours for $1 million. Besides, it fit their narrative perfectly. The loving husband attends his wife's big night, then gracefully retires to a care facility. It was a perfect ending to their story. Bernice smiled. It was the smile of a cat that has just swallowed the canary. That sounds wonderful, Gus, she said. Of course. We would love for you to be at the Jubilee. It will be a celebration for all of us. Emily nodded vigorously. Monday is fine. I will call the facility and set up the intake for Monday morning. She clutched the unsigned papers to her chest, as if they were holy scripture. Marcus stood up. He walked toward me. Dad, I held up a hand. I didn't look at him. I am going to my room, I said. I need to rest. It has been a long day. I walked past him. I walked past the wife who was robbing me and the daughter-in-law who despised me. I climbed the stairs, feeling their eyes on my back. I could almost hear their thoughts. He is broken. We won. It is over. I went into the guest room and closed the door. I locked it. I walked to the window and watched the sun dip below the horizon. They thought they had just negotiated my surrender. They didn't know they had just accepted an invitation to their own execution. Sunday, the Jubilee. Bernice wanted to be the star of the show. She wanted the spotlight. Fine. I would give her a spotlight. I would give her a spotlight so bright it would burn her to the ground. I sat on the bed and pulled out my laptop. I had a video to edit, and I had 48 hours to turn a tragedy into a masterpiece. The Saturday night before the Jubilee was loud. It was not the kind of loud that comes from a television or a radio. It was the loudness of victory. Downstairs in the living room I had built with my own hands, my wife and my daughter-in-law were throwing a party. It was a small party, just the two of them, but they were making enough noise for a legion of demons. I sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room staring at an open suitcase. I was supposed to be packing. I was supposed to be folding my shirts, gathering my toiletries, and preparing to move into a 12 by 12 room at Golden Horizon on Monday morning. That was the script they had written for me. The defeated old man packing away his life, making way for the new regime. But the suitcase was empty. I wasn't packing clothes. I was packing ammunition. I stood up and walked to the door, cracking it open just an inch. The sounds of their celebration drifted up the stairs like toxic smoke. I heard the distinct pop of a champagne cork. It wasn't the cheap stuff. It sounded like Dom Perignon. Bernice had developed expensive tastes lately, funded by the generous souls of St. Jude's. I crept out into the hallway, moving silently on socked feet. I stopped at the top of the landing, staying in the shadows. I could see into the living room below. Emily was standing in the center of the room, holding a crystal flute. She was spinning around, her arms wide, looking at the walls as if she were already measuring them for demolition. "It is going to be perfect, Bernice," Emily squealed, her voice high and shrill. "We knock out this wall here between the living room and the dining room. It will open up the entire space. We can put the reception desk right there by the entrance, and the studio will be magnificent. We will rip out this old carpet and put in bamboo flooring, sustainable bamboo." She took a swig of champagne. "I can see it now. Namaste yoga at the Freeman House. It has such a ring to it. Don't you think?" Bernice was sitting on the sofa, my sofa, with her feet propped up on the coffee table. She was laughing, a sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. "It sounds divine, Emily," she said. "Just make sure you keep the noise down on Sunday mornings. I need my beauty sleep before service." Emily giggled. "Oh, don't worry. Sundays are for restoratives. Quiet meditation." She walked over to Bernice and grabbed her hand, pulling it up toward the light. "But forget the studio for a second," Emily said, her eyes widening. "Look at that rock, Mom, seriously. When did you get that?" I leaned forward. On Bernice's ring finger, replacing the simple gold band I had placed there 45 years ago, was a diamond the size of a grape. It caught the light from the chandelier, throwing sparkles across the room. Bernice admired her hand, twisting it back and forth. "Isn't it breathtaking?" she cooed. "It was a gift. From the deacon board. They presented it to me yesterday privately. They said it was a token of appreciation for my 40 years of service. A Jubilee gift, they called it. A lie. The deacon board was composed of 5 men who complained if we spent more than $50 on coffee for the fellowship hall. They didn't buy diamond rings. They barely bought new hymnals. That ring cost $10,000 if it cost a dime." Emily laughed, a knowing, conspiratorial sound. "Wow. The deacon board must really love you, or maybe a certain member of the clergy has excellent taste in jewelry." Bernice swatted Emily's arm playfully. "Hush, you naughty girl. It is a blessing. That is all." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. They were so brazen. They were drinking my liquor, planning to gut my house, and wearing stolen money on their fingers, all while I was upstairs, presumably weeping into my pillow. I had heard enough. I retreated from the landing and walked down the hall to the master bedroom. Bernice hadn't slept in there for years, but she kept her desk there. It was her command center. It was where she managed the household accounts and, more importantly, the church ledgers. I tried the door. It was unlocked. Arrogance makes people sloppy. She thought I was beaten. She thought I was too confused to understand what a computer was, let alone how to access it. I slipped inside and closed the door softly. The room smelled of her perfume and the faint, lingering scent of Thomas's cologne. I sat at her desk. I woke up the computer. The password screen stared back at me. Bernice wasn't a technological genius. She used the same password for everything. For years it had been Jesus Saves. When that required a number, she changed it to Jesus Saves 1. I typed it in. Incorrect password. I paused. She had changed it. I thought about what mattered to her now. I thought about the new life she was building. I typed in Thomas, 1980. Incorrect password. I sat back thinking. What was the one thing she cared about more than Thomas, more than the church, the money, or the fame? I typed in Jubilee 50. The screen unlocked. I didn't waste time celebrating. I plugged in the USB drive I had brought from my room. I navigated straight to her documents folder. There were hundreds of files, sermons, prayer lists, recipes, but I was looking for the numbers. I found a folder labeled St. Jude Financials. I opened it. Inside was a spreadsheet named Discretionary Fund 2024. Internal. I double-clicked it. The spreadsheet filled the screen. It was a labyrinth of numbers, columns, and dates. I am an engineer. I speak the language of data. I scanned the rows. I saw the hotel charges, the Waldorf, the Ritz. I saw the consulting fees paid to shell companies I didn't recognize. I saw the cash withdrawals labeled as petty cash or outreach supplies. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a recurring monthly payment starting 6 months ago. The payee wasn't a company. It wasn't a charity. It was listed as E. Freeman, Consulting Services, amount $5,000, $5,000 a month, going to E. Freeman, Emily Freeman. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my glasses. Emily wasn't a consultant. She didn't work for the church. She taught yoga part-time and spent the rest of her day shopping. Why was Bernice paying Emily $5,000 a month from the church's stolen funds? I scrolled back to the date of the first payment. It was 6 months ago. That was around the time Emily had suddenly become very interested in my health. That was around the time she had started whispering in Marcus's ear that I was losing my mind. And then it hit me. Emily didn't just stumble into this conspiracy. She hadn't been tricked by Bernice. She knew. She must have caught them. Maybe she saw them at a restaurant. Maybe she saw a text message on Bernice's phone. And instead of telling Marcus that his mother was sleeping with the pastor, she had leveraged it. She had blackmailed her own mother-in-law. Pay me $5,000 a month or I tell the bishop. Pay me and I will help you get rid of Gus. It was the hush money Emily. I felt a wave of nausea. This was worse than I thought. Emily wasn't just a greedy daughter-in-law trying to secure an inheritance. She was an active participant in the destruction of my family. She was the architect of my demise. I looked at the notes column next to one of the payments. Bernice had written a small comment, Yoga Studio Seed Money, Installment 4. Seed money. They were funding her business with hush money stolen from the offering plate. I quickly highlighted the entire spreadsheet. I dragged it to the USB drive. I copied the bank statements. I copied the emails between Bernice and Thomas where they discussed hiding the assets. I took everything. When the progress bar hit 100%, I pulled the drive out. I put it in my pocket right next to the video of the safe. I shut down the computer. I wiped the keyboard with my handkerchief to remove my fingerprints just in case. I stood up and walked to the window. Down below, in the backyard, the security lights had come on. I could see the garden where I had taught Marcus to play catch. I thought about Marcus. Did he know he knew about the stealing? I had shown him that. But did he know his wife was blackmailing his mother? Did he know that the capital for the yoga studio wasn't a loan but the price of his mother's silence? Probably not. Emily treated Marcus like a mushroom, kept him in the dark, and fed him manure. I walked back into the hallway. The laughter from downstairs was louder now. They were drunk. They were high on their own brilliance. Cheers to the future, I heard Emily shout. To Namaste Yoga. To the future, Bernice yelled back. I walked back to the guest room. I closed the door. I sat on the bed and looked at my empty suitcase. I stood up and walked to the closet. I took out my best suit, the navy blue one I wore to weddings and funerals. I took out my crisp white shirt. I took out my polished black shoes. I laid them on the bed. I wasn't packing for a nursing home. I was packing for a war. Tomorrow was Sunday, the Jubilee. Bernice was going to stand on stage and accept her award. Thomas was going to preach about righteousness. Emily was going to sit in the front row wearing her expensive clothes bought with blood money. And I was going to be there. I picked up the USB drive and held it in my hand. It was so small, light as a feather, but inside it held the weight of 1,000 sins. They thought they were celebrating a victory tonight. They were popping champagne and planning renovations. Let them drink. Let them laugh. Because tomorrow the bill comes due, and I was going to make sure they paid every single cent. Sunday morning arrived with a fanfare of church bells that echoed through the neighborhood like a summons to court. The sun was bright, piercing through the blinds of the guest room where I had spent a sleepless night staring at the ceiling. Today was the day, the Jubilee, the 50-year celebration of St. Jude's Parish and the coronation of Bernice Freeman as the undisputed queen of the congregation. Downstairs, the house was a whirlwind of activity. I could hear the hairdryer blowing at gale force. I could smell the heavy floral scent of hairspray and the burnt sugar aroma of Bernice's nerves. She was in high gear. This was her moment. She was going to stand on that stage, receive a plaque, accept the applause, and solidify her legacy before she cashed out and ran off with her lover. I dressed slowly. I put on the navy suit I had laid out the night before. I tied my tie with a double Windsor knot, pulling it tight against my collar. I looked in the mirror. The man staring back at me didn't look like a victim. He looked like a judge. I walked downstairs. Bernice was in the hallway, spinning in front of the full-length mirror. She was wearing a white suit with gold trim, a matching hat that looked like a satellite dish, and of course the diamond ring. She looked magnificent. She looked like money. "Gus," she snapped, seeing me on the stairs. "You are late. The limo is coming in 20 minutes. Do you have the speech I wrote for you?" I patted my breast pocket. Right here, Bernice. I memorized it. She nodded, distracted, picking a piece of lint off her sleeve. Good. Keep it short. 2 minutes. Just say how proud you are, how I am the spiritual anchor of the family, and then sit down. Do not ramble about your bridges or your structural engineering. Nobody cares today. I walked over to the coffee table where a pile of flash drives and photo albums sat. Bernice, I said, keeping my voice mild. I was thinking, since I am retiring to the home tomorrow, I want to do something special today. Let me run the video presentation. Bernice froze. She looked at me with suspicion. You? She asked. Gus, you can barely work the microwave. This is a complex multimedia presentation. It has music. It has transitions. I smiled, a sad, defeated little smile. I know, I said, but I used to run the projector for the youth group, remember, back in the 90s. And I want to feel useful. Just one last time before I go. I gestured vaguely toward the window, implying the nursing home. Bernice softened. Not out of kindness, but out of pity. And perhaps a bit of relief. She had a million other things to do. If the old man wanted to sit in the dark audiovisual booth and push a button, it would keep him out of the way. She picked up a silver USB drive from the table and tossed it to me. Fine, she said, but don't touch anything else on the computer. Just plug it in, open the file marked Bernice Tribute, and press play when the choir finishes the Hallelujah chorus. Can you handle that? I caught the drive. I closed my fist around it. I can handle it, I said. 20 minutes later, I was in my truck. I had declined the limo. I told them I needed to get to the church early to set up the equipment. They didn't argue. They were happy to not have the gloomy old man bringing down the vibe in the champagne-filled stretch Hummer. I drove to the church. The parking lot was already filling up. There were banners everywhere. Jubilee 50, celebrating faith and family. The irony was thick enough to choke on. I parked in the back and walked to the side entrance. I went straight up the narrow staircase to the A/V booth. It was a small room overlooking the sanctuary, filled with soundboards, monitors, and tangled wires. It was the brain of the church. And today I was the surgeon. I wasn't alone. Sitting in the swivel chair, tapping away on a laptop, was Jamal. Jamal was my nephew, my sister's son. He was 22, a computer science major at the University of Illinois. He was a good kid. I had paid for his tuition when his father ran out on them. He was the only person in the family who didn't look at me like I was a walking ATM. Uncle Gus, Jamal said, spinning around. You made it. I locked the door behind me. Did you bring the software? I asked. Jamal patted his laptop. Got everything you asked for. But Uncle Gus, are you sure about this? You sounded pretty intense on the phone. You said you wanted to edit the tribute video. I walked over to him. I pulled the silver USB drive Bernice gave me from my pocket. Then I pulled the black USB drive from my other pocket, the one containing the evidence. I handed them both to him. Jamal, I said, I need you to do something for me. I need you to take the photos from the silver drive, the pictures of Bernice feeding the poor, the pictures of her receiving awards, and I need you to mix them with the videos on the black drive. Jamal looked confused. Mix them like a montage. Exactly, I said. Start with the nice photos. Let the music play. Great is thy faithfulness. Let everyone tear up. Let them feel the love. And then, right in the middle, I want you to cut to the footage from the black drive. Jamal plugged the black drive into his computer. He opened the first file. It was the video from the teddy bear. He watched Bernice and Thomas drinking my cognac. He clicked the next file. He watched them opening the safe. His eyes went wide. He looked at me, his mouth open. Uncle Gus, is this real? It is real, Jamal, I said. He looked back at the screen. He saw the spreadsheet of payments to Emily. Damn, he whispered. They are robbing the place blind. He looked up at me, a new respect in his eyes. And you want to play this? Today with the bishop here, I want to play it all, I said. I want you to synchronize the audio so that when the choir hits the high note, the safe door opens. I want you to overlay the bank statements on the screen while Thomas is preaching. Can you do that? Jamal cracked his knuckles. He smiled. It was the smile of a hacker who had just been given permission to destroy the Death Star. Uncle Gus, for you, I can make it sing. We gotta work. For the next hour, the booth was silent except for the clicking of keys and the hum of the hard drive. Jamal was a wizard. He spliced the footage with surgical precision. He color-corrected the grainy night vision. He amplified the audio so Bernice's voice saying, "Dump Augustus," was crystal clear. By the time the limo pulled up outside, the file was ready. We named it Bernice_tribute_final_V2.mp4, so it looked completely innocent. We loaded it onto the main projection computer. We tested the sound. It was perfect. At 10:30, the door handle jiggled. Then a knock. "Gus, open up." "It is Emily." I signaled Jamal to minimize the editing software. I unlocked the door. Emily stood there looking flushed and annoyed. She was wearing a dress that probably cost 3 of my pension checks. "Mom wants to know if it is ready," she demanded. "The bishop is in the green room. We start in 10 minutes. I stepped aside and pointed to the monitor. The title screen was up, Bernice Freeman, A Life of Service. A generic picture of a dove was in the background. "It is ready, Emily," I said. She peered at the screen. "Well, make sure you don't screw up the volume. Mom wants it loud." I looked her in the eye. "Oh, it will be loud, Emily. I promise you that." She sneered at me, turned on her heel, and marched away. I closed the door and locked it again. Down below, the sanctuary was filling up. 500 people. The pews were packed. I saw the ladies in their Sunday best fanning themselves with church programs. I saw the deacon board sitting in the front row looking solemn. And then the procession started. The organ roared to life. The choir began to sway. Reverend Thomas walked in first, looking like a movie star in his golden vestments. He waved to the crowd, flashing that $1,000,000 smile. Then came Bernice. The congregation stood up. They clapped. They cheered. She walked down the aisle like she was walking down a runway. She waved the hand with the diamond ring. She blew kisses. She dabbed at fake tears with a lace handkerchief. Marcus and Emily walked behind her looking like the royal guard. Marcus looked nauseous. Emily looked triumphant. They took their seats in the front row right next to Bishop Henderson. The bishop was a large man with kind eyes and a heavy cross around his neck. He shook Bernice's hand warmly. He had no idea he was sitting next to a viper. I put on my headset. I looked at Jamal. "Are we good?" I asked. Jamal nodded. His finger was hovering over the enter key. "We are locked and loaded, Uncle Gus. Just give the signal." I sat back in the high chair, looking down at them through the glass partition. They looked so small from up here. Just little ants scurrying around a crumb. The service began. Thomas gave the opening prayer. He spoke about integrity. He spoke about the sanctity of the trust placed in leadership. I almost laughed. The man had no shame. Then it was time for the speeches. Emily went up first. She spoke about Bernice's generosity. She actually used the word selfless. Then Marcus went up. He stumbled through his speech, his voice shaking. He didn't look at me up in the booth. He looked at the floor. He knew. Deep down he knew something was wrong, but he was too cowardly to stop it. Finally, Thomas took the microphone, and now he boomed his voice, filling the hall. "It is my honor to introduce the man who has stood beside this saint for 45 years, a man who is entering a new season of rest, but who wanted to be here today to honor his wife. Please welcome Augustus Freeman." The spotlight hit the booth. I stood up and waved. The crowd applauded politely. It was the applause you give to an old relic. I picked up the booth microphone. My voice echoed through the sanctuary. "Thank you, Reverend," I said. My voice was steady, stronger than it had been in years. I looked down at Bernice. She was smiling up at me, nodding encouragingly. "Stick to the script, Gus," her eyes said. "My wife Bernice is a woman of many hidden talents," I said. "She has done things for this church that none of you know about. She has moved mountains. She has moved assets." Bernice's smile faltered slightly. She tilted her head. "And today," I continued, "I don't want to tell you about her. I want to show you. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but I think you will find that a video is worth about $100,000. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Thomas looked up, frowning. I looked at Jamal. "Hit it," I said. Jamal pressed the key. The lights in the sanctuary dimmed. The massive screen behind the pulpit flickered to life. The music started. It was soft, angelic. A photo of Bernice at a soup kitchen appeared. The crowd went, "Aw." Then a photo of Bernice with the youth choir. More applause. And then the music warped. It slowed down, twisting into a low, ominous drone. The screen went black for a split second. And when it came back on, it wasn't a photo. It was the video of the safe opening. The sanctuary went dead silent. 500 people held their breath at the exact same moment. On the screen, Bernice's voice rang out clear and sharp. It is not much, but it will cover the minimum payment on the credit card. I watched Bernice. She didn't move. She was frozen in her seat, her mouth slightly open, staring at the screen where she was currently stuffing tithe money into a duffel bag. I leaned into the microphone. Happy Jubilee, Bernice. The show had just begun. The Fellowship Hall of St. Jude's had been transformed. I had seen this room host bingo nights, potlucks with lukewarm potato salad and basketball games for the youth league. But today, it looked like the ballroom of the Titanic before it hit the iceberg. The walls were draped in gold and white silk, hiding the cinder blocks and the water stains I had pointed out to the maintenance committee 3 years ago. Crystal chandeliers rented for the occasion hung from the steel rafters, casting a shimmering, expensive light over 500 guests. The air smelled of money. It smelled of roast beef, heavy perfumes, and the fresh lilies that adorned every table. Lilies, the flower of funerals and resurrections. It was fitting, I suppose, because today a reputation was going to die and the truth was going to rise from the dead. I sat in the back of the room up in the audiovisual booth that overlooked the sea of round tables. The glass partition separated me from the noise, turning the roar of the crowd into a dull, distant hum. I felt like a sniper in a tower waiting for the target to walk into the crosshairs. Next to me, Jamal was typing furiously on his keyboard, making final adjustments to the audio levels. He looked nervous. His leg was bouncing up and down. Easy, Jamal, I said quietly. Just breathe. You are doing the Lord's work today. Jamal looked at me and cracked a small, terrified smile. I don't know if the Lord usually works with MP4 files and incriminating bank statements, Uncle Gus. I patted his shoulder. God works in mysterious ways, son. Today he is working through a projector. I looked down at the head table. It was elevated on a platform draped in a tablecloth that looked like it was woven from spun gold. Sitting there in the center of it all was the unholy Trinity. Bernice looked spectacular. I had to give her that. She was wearing a floor-length white gown that shimmered under the lights. It was tailored to perfection, hugging her frame and flaring out at the bottom. She wore a matching hat, a wide-brimmed creation adorned with white feathers that looked like a halo. She sat with her back straight, her chin tilted up, accepting the adoration of the room with a practiced grace. Every few seconds she would flash that diamond ring, the ring bought with the widow's mite, waving to a friend, or wiping away a non-existent tear. To her right sat Bishop Henderson. The poor man looked delighted, eating his salad, completely unaware that he was breaking bread with thieves. To her left sat Reverend Thomas. He had changed out of his standard vestments into a gold-embroidered robe that made him look less like a pastor and more like a king. He was leaning in, whispering something to Bernice that made her giggle like a schoolgirl. I zoomed in with the camera lens on the console monitor. I saw his hand brush against hers under the table. It was subtle, but it was there. The arrogance of it. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they were invisible. And at the end of the table sat Marcus and Emily. Emily was beaming. She was drinking champagne, her eyes scanning the room, calculating the net worth of every guest. She looked like she had already moved into my house and started knocking down walls. She was wearing a dress that was too tight and too bright, desperate to be noticed. But Marcus looked like a man walking to the gallows. He wasn't eating. He wasn't drinking. He was staring at his plate, his face pale and clammy. Every time someone came up to congratulate him on his mother's success, he flinched. He knew. He didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but he knew the foundation was rotten. He knew his father was not the senile old fool everyone claimed, and the guilt was eating him alive from the inside out. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my old silver flask. I hadn't carried it in 20 years, but today wasn't a day for abstinence. Today was a day for fortification. I unscrewed the cap. The smell of good Kentucky bourbon drifted up sharp and familiar. I took a sip. The burn was pleasant. It grounded me. Cheers, Bernice, I whispered. Enjoy the salad. It is the last good meal you are going to have for a long time. The lights in the hall dimmed slightly. A hush fell over the crowd. The spotlight swept across the room and landed on the podium. Reverend Thomas stood up. He buttoned his jacket, adjusted his gold cuffs, and walked to the microphone. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who knows he owns the room. He flashed that megawatt smile, the one that made the collection plates overflow. My brothers and sisters. Thomas began, his voice smooth as velvet. We are gathered here today not just to celebrate 50 years of this building. We are here to celebrate the living stones that hold it together." He paused for effect. A murmur of agreement went through the crowd. "We live in a world that is often dark." Thomas continued, his voice dropping to a somber, serious tone. "We live in a world of selfishness, of greed, of sin. But in the midst of that darkness, God sends us lights. He sends us beacons of hope. He sends us women like Bernice Freeman." The crowd erupted in applause. Bernice bowed her head modestly, pressing her hand to her chest. Thomas waited for the applause to die down. He looked down at Bernice with an expression that was supposed to be pastoral love, but I saw the heat in it. I saw the look of a partner in crime. "I have watched this woman work tirelessly," Thomas said. When the heating bill needed to be paid and the coffers were empty, Bernice found a way. When the roof leaked and the contractors demanded payment, Bernice stepped up. She manages the finances of the women's ministry with a wisdom that is nothing short of divine. I scoffed. Divine wisdom. That was a nice way of saying creative accounting and forgery. Thomas gripped the sides of the podium. "She is a virtuous wife," he declared. "A mother who has raised a fine son. A grandmother to the community. She sacrifices her time, her energy, and yes, even her own resources for the good of St. Jude's. She asks for nothing in return. No glory, no fame, just the satisfaction of serving her Lord." He turned his gaze toward the back of the room. He looked up toward the audio-visual booth. He couldn't see me through the glare of the spotlight, but he knew I was there. "And we must also acknowledge her husband." Augustus Thomas said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "Brother Gus is entering a twilight season. His mind is not what it once was. He struggles with confusion. But Bernice, oh Bernice, stands by him. She cares for him with the patience of a saint. She bears the burden of his decline without a single complaint." The crowd turned and looked toward the booth. I could feel their eyes. Pitying eyes. Sad eyes. Poor Gus, they were thinking. Lost his mind. Thank God he has a wife like Bernice to put him in a nice home. Thomas smiled a sad, benevolent smile. "So let us raise a glass," he said, lifting his champagne flute. "To Bernice Freeman, the saint of St. Jude's, the woman who saved this church." To Bernice, the crowd roared. 500 glasses were raised in the air. Bernice stood up. She walked to the podium to stand next to Thomas. She took the microphone. Tears were streaming down her face. "Oh, stop," she sobbed beautifully. "You are too kind. I am just a humble servant. Everything I do for the legacy of this family and for the future of this church." She looked at Marcus. "For my son, and for my dear husband Augustus, who I love more than life itself." She blew a kiss toward the booth. I looked at Jamal. His hands were hovering over the keyboard. "Is it time, Uncle Gus?" he asked. I took one last sip of bourbon. I screwed the cap back onto the flask and put it in my pocket. I looked at the screen. I saw Bernice standing there bathed in white light, holding the hand of the man she was sleeping with, wearing the ring she stole to buy, accepting the praise she didn't earn. She wanted a legacy. I would give her a legacy. She wanted the truth to come out. I would pour it out like a flood. I reached out and placed my hand over Jamal's. "It is time to confess," I said. I pressed the button. The lights in the hall went black. Not dim, pitch black. The crowd gasped. A few nervous laughs rippled through the room. "Is this part of the show?" someone whispered. Then the massive screen behind the stage exploded into life. It wasn't a photo of Bernice baking cookies. It wasn't a photo of her teaching Sunday school. It was a video, grainy and green-tinted, but sharp enough to see the sweat on a forehead. The sound system, which Jamal had turned up to maximum volume, crackled. And then a voice boomed through the hall. Not the voice of a saint, but the voice of a thief. "The auditor is coming in 3 weeks. We need the big money. We need the house money." The silence in the room was instant and absolute. It was the silence of a heart stopping. I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms. The sermon was over. The lesson was about to begin. The darkness in the fellowship hall was absolute. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the hum of the ventilation system and the rustle of expensive fabrics as 500 people shifted in their seats. They were expecting a spotlight. They were expecting a fanfare. They were expecting another polished tribute to the glory of Bernice Freeman. But I didn't give them a spotlight. I gave them a revelation. From the audio booth, I watched the massive projection screen descend from the ceiling behind the pulpit. It glowed with a soft, benevolent blue light. Jamal hit the first cue. The video began exactly as Bernice had expected. Soft instrumental piano music drifted through the speakers, a rendition of Amazing Grace that was sweet enough to cause cavities. On the screen, a high-resolution photo appeared. It was Bernice standing in the snow handing a turkey to a homeless man. The lighting was perfect. Her smile was angelic. A collective sigh of admiration rippled through the room. "Oh, look at that!" A woman in the front row whispered loud enough for the microphone to catch. "She is truly a blessing." Bernice, sitting at the head table, dabbed her eyes with her handkerchief. She leaned into Thomas, who patted her hand with pastoral affection. They were relaxing. They thought the danger had passed. They thought the old man in the booth had fallen in line. The slide changed. Now it was Bernice leading the children's choir. Then Bernice praying at the altar. Then Bernice holding a check for a charity drive. The applause started to build. It was a rhythmic, polite clapping, the sound of a community honoring its matriarch. I looked at Jamal. The blue light from the monitors illuminated his face. He looked terrified, but his hand was steady. Now I whispered. Jamal pressed the enter key. The sweet piano music didn't fade out. It was ripped away. It was replaced by a harsh static screech that sounded like a microphone being dragged across concrete. The sound was so loud, so sudden that half the guests jumped in their seats. The screen flickered violently. The image of Bernice praying dissolved into digital noise. Then the image stabilized. It wasn't a photo, it was a video. And it wasn't filmed in the bright light of day. It was the grainy green-tinted footage from the night vision camera inside the teddy bear. The room went deadly silent. The applause died instantly. On the screen, the location was unmistakable. It was the living room of the Freeman house. My house. Bernice was there. She wasn't wearing her church robes. She was wearing her silk robe, the one that slipped off her shoulder. And she wasn't holding a Bible. She was holding a glass of amber liquid. Next to her sat Reverend Thomas. He was in his shirt sleeves, his feet propped up on my coffee table, the same table where my Bible used to sit. He was holding the bottle of Hennessy Parodies. The audio kicked in. It was crystal clear. Jamal had done his job well. The voices boomed through the massive speakers of the fellowship hall, echoing off the steel rafters. "The old fool is gone," Thomas's voice asked on the screen. It was casual mocking. "He thinks he is losing his mind." On the screen, Bernice laughed. It wasn't her church laugh. It was a cruel, cackling sound. "He is gone, fishing, the video," Bernice said. "Emily did a great job scaring him with the dementia talk. He was apologizing to me yesterday. It was pathetic." In the hall, 500 heads turned toward the head table. Bernice froze. Her hand, which had been dabbing her eyes, stopped in midair. Her face went pale, the blood draining away so fast she looked like a wax figure. Thomas dropped his fork. It clattered onto his china plate with a sound like a gunshot. On the screen, the conversation continued. "We need him to sign those papers," Bernice Thomas said, pouring more liquor into his glass. "The auditor is coming. We are short $100,000. A gasp went through the room. It started in the front row and rolled back like a wave. $100,000. The number hung in the air, heavy and toxic. "Don't worry, baby," Bernice on the screen cooed, leaning in to kiss Thomas. "As soon as I dump Augustus in that facility, I am free. I will sell the house. The money is yours. Or rather, ours." Then the video cut. It cut to the second clip. The clip from the pastor's office. The screen showed the painting of the Last Supper swinging open. It showed the safe. It showed Bernice's hands, the same hands that had just waved to the crowd, pulling out stacks of cash. "This will cover the credit card," she said on screen, "but we need the house money to go to the Bahamas." "The Bahamas?" Thomas asked on the video. "Yes," Bernice replied. "Once the old man is locked away, we deserve a vacation. First class." The reaction in the hall was visceral. Bishop Henderson, the man of God who had come to honor this woman, was staring at the screen with his mouth open. He was holding a glass of iced water. His hand started to tremble. Then his fingers simply let go. The glass hit the table. It didn't break, but it tipped over, sending a flood of ice water into his lap and soaking the tablecloth. He didn't move. He didn't even seem to notice the cold water. He was paralyzed by the sight of his star pastor stealing from the tithe. Suddenly, Bernice snapped out of her trance. She stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "No!" she screamed. Her voice was shrill, cracking with panic. "That is a lie. That is fake." She pointed a shaking finger at the screen. "Turn it off!" she shrieked. looking up at the audio booth. Her face was twisted into a mask of rage we had never seen before. "Turn it off right now." She looked at the crowd. "It is Aisha yelled, desperate. "It is a deep fake. My husband is sick. He made this up. He is crazy." But the video didn't stop. It kept playing. It showed Thomas shoving the money into his duffel bag. It showed them kissing passionately in front of the open safe. Thomas stood up now. He looked less like a king and more like a rat caught in a trap. He looked at the booth. He saw me standing there behind the glass. Gus Thomas shouted, his voice booming without a microphone. "Stop this madness. You are confused." I picked up the booth microphone. I pressed the talk button. My voice overrode his shouting. "I am not confused, Reverend," I said calmly. "The video is dated last Thursday. You were wearing that tie, the blue one with the stripes." I pointed down at him. "You are wearing the same tie right now." Thomas looked down at his chest. He was indeed wearing the blue striped tie under his gold robe. He grabbed the fabric as if it were burning him. The crowd saw it. The murmurs turned into shouting. "That is the collection money," a deacon shouted from the front row, standing up. I counted that stack myself. Bernice looked around wildly. She saw the faces of her friends, her admirers turning into faces of judgment. She saw the disgust. She saw the shock. She did the only thing she knew how to do. She tried to take control. "Security," she screamed. "Get up there. Get him out of the booth. He is having an episode." Two of the church ushers, big men who usually handled parking, looked at each other. They looked at Bernice, then up at the booth. They hesitated. They had seen the video. They knew what they were seeing wasn't an episode. It was a confession. "Do something," Thomas yelled at them. The ushers started to move toward the stairs leading to the booth. I looked at Jamal. "Lock it," I said. Jamal jumped up and threw the deadbolt on the heavy steel door. I turned back to the window. The ushers reached the door. They tried the handle. It was locked. They pounded on it. "Open up, Gus," one of them shouted. I ignored them. I turned up the volume on the video. On the screen, the scene shifted to the spreadsheet, the rows and rows of numbers, the payments to Emily, E. Freeman, consulting services, $5,000. I saw Emily sitting at the end of the head table. She had been trying to shrink into her chair, hoping to be invisible, but when her name appeared on the screen in 40-foot letters, she gasped. She looked at Marcus. Marcus was staring at the screen. He saw the payments. He saw the note, "Hush money." He turned to his wife. His face wasn't pale anymore. It was red. "You, Marcus," said his voice, cutting through the noise in the hall. "You knew." Emily grabbed his arm. "Marcus, baby, I can explain. You were taking money," Marcus shouted, standing up and shoving her hand away. "You told me we were broke. You told me my mother was helping us with a loan. You were blackmailing her." The chaos in the room was absolute. People were standing on chairs to get a better view. Phones were out recording everything. The Jubilee celebration was live streaming to the world, but not the way they intended. Bernice was panting. She looked at the bishop. "Bishop, please," she begged, grabbing his sleeve. "You know me. I am a woman of God. This is the devil's work." Bishop Henderson stood up slowly. He was a tall man, and in his anger he looked like a giant. He pulled his arm away from her grasp as if she were contagious. He looked at the screen where Bernice was currently laughing about going to the Bahamas on stolen money. Then he looked down at her. "Woman," he said, his voice low and trembling with righteous fury, "the only devil in this room is the one staring back at me." He turned to the head deacon. "Call the police," the bishop ordered. Bernice let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. She looked up at the booth one last time. Our eyes met. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't laughing. I just raised my glass of water, my pretend bourbon, and toasted her. The video ended. The screen went black. But I wasn't done. I leaned into the microphone. "Please remain seated," I said to the crowd. "We have one more file to review. It is called the bank statements." Bernice sank into her chair, burying her face in her hands. The party was over. The hangover had just begun. The room was still reeling from the sight of their pastor drinking my cognac and their saintly matriarch stuffing cash into a duffel bag, but I did not let them breathe. I did not give them a moment to compose themselves or spin a new lie. I had the floor, and I was going to use every second of it. I nodded to Jamal. He hit the next key on the laptop. The screen changed instantly. The grainy video footage vanished, replaced by a stark, high-definition image that was far more damaging than any illicit kiss. It was a bank statement. But not just any bank statement. It was the internal ledger for the St. Jude's Building Fund, The numbers were blown up to 10 feet tall. Everyone in the back row could see them. Everyone could see the withdrawals. The room went quiet in a different way now. This was the silence of people doing math in their heads. I leaned into the microphone. "You all thought the bell tower was delayed because of permits?" I said, my voice calm and steady. "You thought the roof repair was stalled because of supply chain issues. But the numbers do not lie." On the screen, a red laser pointer, which Jamal was controlling with the mouse, circled a transaction. Porsche dealership of Chicago. $120,000. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Then the pointer moved down. Tiffany and Company. $12,000. "That would be the ring on Bernice's finger," I said. "The one she told you was a gift from the deacon board." I looked down at the deacons in the front row. Deacon Miller, a man who had pinched pennies for this church for 30 years, stood up. His face was purple. He looked at Bernice. He looked at the ring. He looked like he was about to have a stroke. He did not buy that ring. I continued, "You did. Every time you put $1 in the plate, you were buying Bernice a diamond." The screen flashed again. Now came the spreadsheet. The file I had stolen from Bernice's computer the night before. The file that proved this was not just a crime of passion, but a conspiracy of greed. The header read, "Project Golden Horizon," and there highlighted in yellow was the column that made the room explode. Payee Emily Freeman. Memo consulting services / silence fee. Amount $30,000 total to date. I saw Emily. She was no longer shrinking in her chair. She was vibrating with panic. She saw her life unraveling in real time. She saw the yoga studio, the social status, the marriage, all of it turning to ash. She snapped. It happened fast. Emily jumped up from her seat. She didn't look like the poised upper-class woman she pretended to be. She looked feral. "Turn it off," she screamed, her voice cracking into a shriek. "That is private. That is illegal." She looked at the projection booth. Then she looked at the cables running along the side of the stage. She made a decision. A stupid, desperate decision. She kicked off her high heels and ran. She ran toward the stage, aiming for the main power junction box that fed the screen. She thought if she could just pull the plug, the truth would disappear, but panic makes you clumsy. As she scrambled up the stairs to the stage, the hem of her expensive, too-tight dress caught on the edge of a monitor wedge. She didn't just trip. She sprawled. It was a hard, ugly fall. She slammed onto the wooden stage face first. The microphone stand she tried to grab for balance toppled over with a deafening screech of feedback that made everyone cover their ears. She lay there for a moment, tangled in the cables. She had tried to sever her dress, torn her dignity completely gone. She tried to scramble up, but she slipped again. It was pathetic. It was the physical manifestation of her moral collapse. Nobody moved to help her. Not her husband, not the bishop, not even Bernice. They just watched her writhe on the floor like a worm on a hook. I let the image on the screen linger for another moment before I signaled Jamal to play the final card. The screen changed one last time. This was the blow that would shatter whatever was left of my family. It was a document scanned in high resolution. Medical evaluation report. Patient Augustus Freeman. Diagnosis severe dementia. But Jamal had zoomed in on one specific detail. The date. I spoke into the microphone, my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed like thunder. "Look at the date," I said. The date on the signature was Tuesday, but the appointment where Dr. Eris came to my house to evaluate me, was Wednesday. A murmur of confusion turned into a roar of realization. "They signed my death warrant before they even saw me," I said. "They declared me incompetent a full 24 hours before the doctor walked through my door. It was not a diagnosis, it was a hit job." I looked down at Marcus. My son was sitting at the table. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at his hands. He was looking at the tablecloth. He was shaking. He realized it. Finally, through the fog of his weakness and his wife's manipulation, he realized what he had almost done. He had almost signed his father away based on a lie. He had almost locked me in a cage because a piece of paper told him to. He let out a sound. It wasn't a word. It was a groan, a deep, guttural sound of pure anguish. He slumped forward. He didn't faint, but his spirit gave out. He buried his face in his arms on the table, knocking over his untouched champagne glass. He curled into himself, trying to disappear, trying to hide from the shame that was burning him alive. The room was in chaos now. People were shouting, some were crying. The bishop was standing with his hands raised, trying to restore order, but there is no order when the temple is falling down. And then there was Thomas, Reverend Thomas, the man in the gold robe, the man with the Porsche. He saw the crowd turning. He saw the anger in their eyes. These weren't his sheep anymore. They were wolves, and they had just realized he was the one who had been eating the lambs. He looked at Bernice. She was sobbing, useless to him now. He looked at Emily, humiliated on the stage. He looked at Marcus, broken. He realized he was alone. He stood up slowly, trying not to draw attention to himself. He backed away from the head table. He kept his eyes on the exit sign at the back of the hall, the one near the kitchen. He thought he could slip away. He thought he could make it to his Porsche and drive until he hit the state line. He turned and started to walk briskly. Then he started to jog. But he forgot about the deacons. St. Jude's has a board of deacons, 12 men. Most of them are older, yes, but they are men who have worked in steel mills on construction sites and in factories. They are men with hands like shovels and backs like iron. They had been suspicious of Thomas for months. They had whispered about the car. They had whispered about the closed-door meetings with Bernice, but they respected the office, so they stayed quiet. But now the office was empty. All that was left was a thief in a fancy suit. Deacon Miller, the head of the board, saw Thomas moving toward the exit. Miller is 65 years old, a retired linebacker who still looks like he could tackle a truck. He didn't run, he just stepped into the aisle. Then Deacon Jones stepped in next to him. Then Deacon Williams. One by one, the 12 men in dark suits stepped out from their tables. They formed a wall, a human wall of judgment blocking the path to the door. Thomas skidded to a halt. He looked at them, his eyes wide with panic. He tried to put on his pastor voice. "Brothers," he stammered, holding up his hands, "let us not be hasty. There is an explanation for all of this. I need to go to my office to get the records, to prove my innocence." Deacon Miller crossed his massive arms over his chest. He looked down at Thomas with eyes that were cold as ice. "You aren't going to your office," Reverend Miller rumbled. His voice was deep and dangerous. "I command you to move," Thomas shouted, trying to muster some authority. "I am your spiritual leader." "You are a wolf," Miller said, "and you are done eating." Thomas looked left. He looked right. There was no way out. The crowd was closing in behind him. The wall of deacons was in front of him. He tried to push past. He put his hand on Miller's shoulder to shove him aside. That was a mistake. Miller didn't strike him. He didn't need to. He just grabbed Thomas's wrist. He clamped his hand down like a vice. Thomas yelped. "Sit down, boy," Miller said. It wasn't a suggestion. Miller spun him around and shoved him into a metal folding chair near the wall. Thomas hit the seat hard. "Stay there," Deacon Williams said, stepping forward, "unless you want us to lay hands on you. And I don't mean for prayer." Thomas shrank into the chair. The gold robe, once a symbol of his power, now looked like a costume. He was trapped. Up in the booth, I watched it all. I watched Emily sobbing on the floor of the stage, unable to stand up under the weight of her humiliation. I watched Marcus broken and weeping, unable to look at his wife or his mother. I watched Bernice alone at the head table, surrounded by the wreckage of her reputation, shaking uncontrollably as the bishop stared at her with holy wrath. And I watched Thomas guarded by the men he had deceived, looking like a frightened child. I took a deep breath. The air in the booth felt clean. I keyed the microphone one last time. "The police are on their way," I said to the room. "I suggest everyone stay seated. We want to make sure the witness statements are accurate." I sat back in my chair. I looked at Jamal. He was staring down at the scene, his eyes wide. "You did it, Uncle Gus," he whispered. "You actually did it." I looked at the screen where the fake medical report was still glowing, a testament to their cruelty. "No, Jamal," I said softly. "I didn't do it. They did it to themselves. I just turned on the lights." I poured the last drop of bourbon into the cap of my flask. I drank it. It was finished. The house of cards had fallen. And from my vantage point, the view was spectacular. Chaos is a fire, but authority is water. The fellowship hall was burning with the flames of scandal. 500 people were shouting, crying, and recording the destruction of their church on their smartphones. Emily was still weeping on the stage floor, tangled in cables like a bird caught in a net. Marcus was a broken statue of shame at the table. Thomas was held captive in a metal chair by the deacons, looking like a man awaiting execution. But then the water came. Bishop Henderson moved. He did not run. He did not shout. He moved with the slow, terrifying momentum of a glacier. He was a large man, 6 feet 4 inches of solemn dignity, and as he stepped away from the head table, the crowd instinctively parted. He walked toward the stage. He stepped over the spilled flowers. He stepped past the puddle of ice water. He walked right past Bernice, who was trembling in her chair, reaching out a hand toward him as if begging for a lifeline. He did not even look at her. To him, she was already gone. She was a ghost. He climbed the stairs to the stage. He stopped for a moment to look down at Emily. She looked up at him, her mascara running down her face in black rivers. He did not offer her a hand. He stepped over her legs as if she were a piece of debris left by a storm. He reached the podium. The feedback from the toppled microphone stand was still screeching a high-pitched wail that grated on the nerves. The bishop bent down. He picked up the stand. He set it upright. The screeching stopped. He tapped the microphone once. Thump. The sound echoed through the hall like a gavel striking a judge's bench. Silence followed. It rippled outward from the stage, silencing the whispers, the sobs, and the shouting. Within 10 seconds, the room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The bishop looked out at the congregation. His face was not angry. It was not sad. It was stone. It was the face of the Old Testament law that does not negotiate. He looked up at the screen where the forged medical document was still displayed, glowing with its damning evidence. He read it. He took a breath. Then he leaned into the microphone. "There will be no closing prayer today," he said. His voice was deep, resonating in the chest of every person in the room. He looked directly at Deacon Miller, who was standing guard over Thomas. "Deacon Miller," the bishop said, "lock the doors. Nobody leaves." Then he looked at the church secretary, Mrs. Higgins, who was sitting in the front row clutching her pearls. "Mrs. Higgins," he said, "pick up your phone." She fumbled for her device, her hands shaking. "Yes, Bishop," she squeaked. "Call the police," he ordered. "Tell them we have a grand larceny in progress. Tell them we have fraud. Tell them to bring detectives." He paused. He looked at Bernice. And then he said, "Call the diocese accounting firm. Tell them to send the forensic auditors. Tonight, I want every ledger, every receipt, and every email seized within the hour." He stepped back from the podium. He did not sit down. He stood there, a sentinel, guarding the ruins of his reputation, waiting for the law to arrive. Up in the booth, I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 40 years. It was done. The highest power in our world had validated the truth. I looked at Jamal. "You stay here, son," I said. "Keep the evidence on the screen. Do not let anyone touch this computer until the police get here." Jamal nodded. He looked at me with wide, reverent eyes. "Where are you going, Uncle Gus?" I buttoned my jacket. I straightened my tie. "I am going downstairs," I said. "I have one last conversation to finish." I unlocked the heavy steel door of the booth. I stepped out onto the metal landing. The staircase wound down into the back of the hall. I began to descend. My knees hurt. My back ached. But I walked tall. I walked with the rhythm of a man who has nothing left to hide. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, the people in the back rows turned to look at me. These were people I had known for decades. People who had looked at me with pity just an hour ago. People who had whispered that poor Gus was losing his marbles. Now they looked at me with something else. Fear, awe, respect. They parted for me. A wide path opened up through the sea of tables leading straight to the front of the room, straight to the head table. I walked slowly. I heard the rustle of clothing as people turned to watch. I heard someone whisper, "He knew. He knew everything." I didn't look left or right. I kept my eyes fixed on the woman sitting at the center of the head table, Bernice. She was slumped in her chair, staring at the tablecloth. Her white dress, so pristine an hour ago, now looked like a shroud. The feathers on her hat were bent. She sensed me coming. She felt the change in the air pressure. She looked up. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her makeup was ruined. But as she saw me walking toward her, the sorrow in her eyes vanished. It was replaced by a sudden sharp flash of hatred, pure, unadulterated venom. She realized in that moment that she couldn't charm her way out of this. She couldn't pray her way out. She couldn't lie her way out. The bishop had called the police. It was over. And the man responsible was walking toward her in a navy blue suit. She stood up. She didn't stand up gracefully. She shoved her chair back so hard it tipped over. She lurched toward me. She looked like a demon unmasked. Her hands were curled into claws. Her teeth were bared. "You!" she screamed. The sound tore through the quiet room. "You did this!" she shrieked, stumbling over the hem of her gown. "You ruined everything. She rushed at me. She wasn't thinking. She just wanted to hurt. She wanted to destroy the mirror that was showing her reflection. "You are evil," she yelled, closing the distance between us. "You are the devil. You planned this. You sat there and watched me." She reached me. She raised her hand, the hand wearing the stolen diamond ring, and swung at my face. She wanted to claw my eyes out. She wanted to erase the witness. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I simply raised my left hand. I caught her wrist in midair. I am a structural engineer. I have spent my life working with steel and stone. My hands are old, yes, but they are strong. They are the hands that built the deck she sunbathed on. They are the hands that carried the groceries she ate. I gripped her wrist. I squeezed. Not enough to break it, but enough to stop her cold. Enough to let her feel the iron in my bones. She gasped. She tried to pull away, but I held her fast. She looked into my eyes. She expected to see anger. She expected to see triumph, but I gave her nothing. My eyes were a flat gray ocean. "You killed me," she hissed, spit flying from her mouth. "You murdered me, Gus. You murdered your own wife in front of the whole world. How could you?" She struggled against my grip, her other hand flailing uselessly against my chest. "I am dead," she wailed. "My life is over. You killed me." I pulled her slightly closer. I wanted her to hear me. I wanted everyone to hear me. I spoke softly, but in the silence of the room, my voice carried like a bell. "No, Bernice," I said. I looked at the diamond ring on her finger. I looked at the stolen champagne on the table. I looked at her lover cowering in the corner. "I didn't kill you," I said. I released her wrist with a sharp shove. She stumbled back, catching herself against the table. "You committed suicide, Bernice," I said. I gestured to the screen behind me, to the evidence, to the wreckage of her greed. "You drank the poison when you opened that safe. You pulled the trigger when you signed that fake medical report. You jumped off the cliff when you decided to sell my home to buy a ticket to the Bahamas." She stared at me, her chest heaving, her mouth opening and closing. I adjusted my cuffs. I smoothed the front of my jacket. "I didn't kill you," I repeated, my voice cold and final. I looked her up and down, inspecting the remains of the woman I had once loved. "I am just the coroner," I said, "and I have just signed the death certificate." Bernice let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. She collapsed back onto her chair, burying her face in the expensive tablecloth, weeping for a life that was already gone. I turned my back on her. I looked at the bishop. He gave me a single slow nod, a nod of respect. Then in the distance, cutting through the Sunday afternoon air, I heard it. The sound of sirens. They were faint at first, then louder. Wailing, approaching. I walked over to the nearest empty chair. I sat down. I crossed my legs. I folded my hands in my lap. I waited for the police to come and clean up the body. The sirens did not whine. They screamed. They cut through the humid Sunday air, penetrating the brick walls of St. Jude's, growing louder and more insistent with every passing second. Inside the fellowship hall, the sound was deafening, a mechanical wail that drowned out the weeping of my daughter-in-law and the frantic whispers of the congregation. I sat in my chair perfectly still. I had expected this moment. In fact, I had orchestrated it. 2 hours before the service began, while Bernice was admiring her stolen diamond in the mirror, I had made a call to Detective Miller at the precinct. I had told him that a major financial crime involving a nonprofit organization was about to be exposed. I told him to bring a team. I told him to bring the fraud unit. And Augustus Freeman does not lie. The double doors at the back of the hall burst open. They didn't swing open politely. They were thrown wide with a force that rattled the hinges. Blue and red lights flooded the room, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and the terrified faces of the guests. The festive gold decorations suddenly looked cheap and gaudy under the harsh glare of the police strobes. 6 officers marched in. They were not wearing dress blues. They were wearing tactical vests. Leading them was a detective in a gray suit, a man with a face carved out of granite who looked like he had seen every sin the city had to offer. "Nobody move," the detective shouted. His voice was a weapon. The room froze. 500 people turned to statues. The detective scanned the room. He saw the chaos. He saw the woman on the floor. He saw the man being held by the deacons. And he saw the massive screen where the evidence was still glowing, a digital indictment that made his job very, very easy. He pointed to the stage. "Secure the exits," he ordered his team. "Nobody leaves until we have statements. You two get the man in the gold robe. You two get the woman in white. The officers moved with practiced efficiency. They marched down the center aisle, their boots thudding heavily on the carpet. It was the sound of consequences arriving. Reverend Thomas saw them coming. He was still pinned in the metal folding chair by Deacon Miller. When he saw the uniforms, the last shred of his arrogance evaporated. He didn't look like a pastor anymore. He looked like a petty thief caught snatching a purse. He tried to stand up, he tried to fix his tie, he tried to summon the charisma that had charmed the wallets out of widows for 3 years. "Officers, thank God you are here," Thomas stammered, his voice pitching high with panic. "There has been a misunderstanding, a terrible mistake. I am the victim here. That man," he pointed a shaking finger up at the audio booth, "that man is mentally unstable. He has hacked our system. He is projecting deepfakes." The detective didn't even look up at the booth. He walked straight to Thomas. He looked at the gold robe. He looked at the Rolex on Thomas's wrist. Then he looked at the screen where the bank statement showing the Porsche purchase was clearly visible. "Reverend Thomas," the detective asked. Yes, that is me. I am the senior pastor. You are under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and grand larceny," the detective said. His tone was bored professional. Thomas gasped. "Arrest? You can't arrest me in my own church. This is sanctuary." "There is no sanctuary for theft," Reverend, the detective said. He spun Thomas around. Thomas tried to pull away, but the officer twisted his arm behind his back with a swift, brutal efficiency. "Ow! My shoulder!" Thomas yelped. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was sharp and loud. Click, click, click. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Better than any choir, better than any organ solo. It was the sound of justice. Thomas was hauled to his feet, the gold robe bunched up around his arms, looking ridiculous. "I demand to speak to the bishop," Thomas shouted, looking frantically toward the stage. "Bishop Henderson. Tell them who I am." The bishop stood on the stage, his arms crossed. He looked down at Thomas with eyes that were cold and dead. "I know who you are." "Mr. Thomas," the bishop said, his voice echoing through the microphone, "you are a thief, and you are fired." Thomas slumped. The fight went out of him. He let the officers drag him toward the exit, his expensive Italian loafers dragging on the carpet. Next was Bernice. She was still sitting at the head table, clutching the tablecloth. When the female officer approached her, Bernice didn't scream. She didn't run. She tried a different tactic. She tried to be the matriarch. She sat up straight. She smoothed her hair. She looked at the officer with a haughty, offended expression. "Young lady, do you know who I am?" Bernice asked. "I am the woman of the year. This is my Jubilee. That video is a fabrication created by my husband. He has dementia. He is not in his right mind." The officer wasn't impressed. She pulled a pair of handcuffs from her belt. "Bernice Freeman," the officer asked. "Mrs. Freeman," Bernice corrected sharply. "And I demand that you remove that camera crew from my face. Ma'am, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and elder abuse," the officer said. "Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." Bernice's eyes went wide. "Elder abuse," she whispered. "We have the medical report, Mrs. Freeman," the officer said, nodding toward the screen. "Forging a medical document to declare a spouse incompetent for financial gain is a Class 2 felony. Stand up." Bernice looked at me. I was sitting just 10 feet away. I was watching her. "Gus," she cried out, her voice cracking. Tell them, I take care of you. Tell them about the soup. Tell them I am a good wife." I looked at her. I didn't blink. "You are a good actress, Bernice," I said quietly. "But the show is closed." The officer grabbed Bernice's arm and hoisted her out of the chair. Bernice fought. She flailed. She tried to kick. "Get your hands off me! This is silk! You are ruining my dress!" The officer spun her around. Bernice's white hat fell off, tumbling to the floor and rolling under the table. Her hair, usually so perfect, fell across her face in wild strands. The handcuffs clicked. Bernice let out a wail that sounded like a banshee. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated narcissism being crushed. Then the officers turned to Emily. Emily was still on the floor of the stage, nursing her bruised knees. She saw the police coming for her. She scrambled backward, crab-walking across the wood. No, I didn't do anything," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Bernice. "It was her. She made me do it. She told me she would cut Marcus out of the will if I didn't help her. I was just a consultant." An officer stepped onto the stage. He didn't handcuff her, not yet, but he stood over her, blocking her path. "Emily Freeman?" he asked. I... Yes, she sobbed. "We have questions regarding your involvement in the procurement of a fraudulent medical certificate," the officer said. "And we have questions about $30,000 in hush money payments. You are being detained for questioning." Emily looked at Marcus. "Marcus, do something. Call your lawyer, call someone." Marcus was still sitting at the table, his head buried in his arms. He didn't look up. He didn't move. He let his wife scream his name, and he did nothing. He had finally realized that saving her was what had destroyed him. "All right, let's go," the detective shouted. "Move them out," and then began the procession. The police led them toward the main doors, but to get there they had to walk the length of the fellowship hall. They had to walk down the center aisle past the 500 guests they had invited to celebrate their glory. It was a walk of shame that would go down in history. Bernice went first. The officer gripped her elbow, marching her forward. Bernice tried to keep her head up, but the weight of the stairs was too heavy. The congregation had parted, creating a wide lane. These were the people who had baked cakes for her. These were the people who had voted for her. These were the people who had envied her. Now they looked at her with revulsion. I saw Mrs. Johnson, the elderly widow whose tithe money had gone into Thomas's gas tank. She stood by the aisle. As Bernice passed, Mrs. Johnson didn't shout. She just spat on the floor. A glob of spit landed right next to Bernice's white shoe. Bernice flinched. She looked at the faces. She saw disgust. She saw betrayal. She saw cameras. Every teenager in the youth group had their phone out live streaming the downfall of the church queen. She looked ridiculous. Her white dress, intended to make her look like an angel, now looked like a costume from a bad play. The diamond ring on her cuffed hand sparkled under the police lights, a beacon of her greed. She tried to speak to Deacon Williams as she passed him. "Brother Williams, please," she whimpered. "You know my heart." Deacon Williams turned his back on her. He literally turned around and faced the wall. Bernice let out a sob. She realized then that she hadn't just lost her freedom. She had lost her audience. And for a woman like Bernice, that was a fate worse than death. Thomas was dragged out behind her. He was weeping openly now, begging God for forgiveness, begging the police for a deal. He looked small. He looked pathetic. And finally, Emily. She wasn't in cuffs, but an officer had a firm grip on her arm. She was limping. Her makeup was a black smear across her face. She kept shouting, "I am a victim, I am a victim," but nobody was listening. I watched them go. I watched them disappear through the double doors into the waiting police cruisers. The red and blue lights flashed against the walls one last time, and then they were gone. The room was left in a stunned silence. The air felt lighter, as if a heavy smog had been sucked out by a vacuum. The bishop stood on the stage. He looked tired. He looked old. He looked at me. "Mr. Freeman," he said. His voice was soft, but it carried in the quiet room. I stood up. "I am sorry, Bishop," I said. "I didn't want to ruin your Sunday." The bishop shook his head. "You didn't ruin it, Gus," he said. "You cleansed it." He looked at the crowd. "Go home," he told them. "Go home and pray for our church. And pray for the souls of those who were just led away. Because where they are going, there is no VIP table." I picked up my phone. I checked the time. It was 1:00 p.m. My suitcase was packed upstairs, but I wouldn't be needing it for the nursing home. I walked toward the exit, following the path the police had cleared. People reached out to touch my arm as I passed. They whispered apologies. "I didn't know, Gus. I am so sorry, Gus." I nodded to them. I accepted their apologies. But I didn't stop. I walked out into the sunlight. The police cars were pulling away, sirens wailing again, taking my wife, her lover, and my daughter-in-law to the county jail. I stood on the sidewalk and watched them go. I took a deep breath of the fresh air. It smelled of rain and exhaust and freedom. I was alone. My house was empty. My family was gone. But for the first time in 40 years, the foundation under my feet felt solid. The sirens faded into the distance, but the wailing did not stop. It just changed pitch. It shifted from the mechanical scream of the police cruisers to the human sob of my son. I stood on the sidewalk outside St. Jude's. The sun was high and hot, baking the asphalt, making the air shimmer. I watched Marcus. He was 40 years old. He was wearing a suit that cost $1,000. He had a degree on his wall and a luxury car in his driveway. But as he ran down the middle of the street chasing the receding taillights of the squad car that held his wife and mother, he looked like a toddler who had been left behind at a park. He actually ran. He sprinted until his lungs gave out his dress shoes, slapping uselessly against the pavement. He waved his arms. He shouted names that no longer mattered. Mom, Emily, wait. He ran until he tripped. He stumbled over his own feet, legs weakened by shock and shame, and fell onto his hands and knees in the middle of the road. The neighbors were watching. The congregation was watching. They stood on the church steps, a silent jury, witnessing the final collapse of the Freeman dynasty. Marcus stayed on the ground for a long moment. I could see his shoulders heaving. I could hear his ragged breathing from 20 yards away. He was realizing, perhaps for the first time in his life, that he was alone. His puppet masters were gone. The women who pulled his strings, who told him what to wear and what to think and who to hate, were in the back of a cage. He slowly turned around. He saw me. I was standing by the entrance of the church, my hands clasped behind my back. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't running. I was the only thing in his life that was still standing upright. He scrambled to his feet. He wiped his face with his sleeve, smearing snot and tears across his expensive jacket. He started walking toward me. Then he started running. "Dad!" he cried out. "Dad!" He rushed up the sidewalk. He looked wild. His tie was crooked. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. He stopped just a few feet from me, panting, desperate. "Dad, you have to do something," he shouted, grabbing the lapels of my jacket. "You have to call them. You have to fix this." I looked down at his hands, the hands that had signed the intake forms for the nursing home, the hands that had accepted the benefits of his wife's blackmail. I reached up and peeled his fingers off my suit. I did it gently but with enough force to let him know he had no grip on me. "Fix what, Marcus?" I asked calmly. "Fix this," he screamed, gesturing toward the empty street. "They took Mom. They took Emily. They are going to jail, Dad. You have to bail them out. You have money. You have the retirement fund. You have the house equity. Call Saul. Tell him to get cash. We can get them out by tonight." I stared at him. The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, standing in the wreckage of his own making, he thought I was just a wallet. He thought I was the safety net he could fall into after he tried to cut the ropes. I stepped back, creating a physical distance between us. "I am not calling Saul Marcus," I said, "and I am certainly not paying bail." Marcus looked like I had slapped him. But they are family," he stammered. "Mom is your wife. She is my wife. You can't just leave them in there. It is a mistake. It is all a big misunderstanding. Mom was just borrowing the money. She was going to pay it back." I shook my head slowly. "Stop it," I said. My voice was low, but it cut through his hysteria like a blade. "Stop lying. You saw the video. You saw the safe. You saw the spreadsheet." I took a step toward him. "You saw the payment labeled, 'Hush Money Marcus.' Did you know?" He flinched. He looked at the ground. I didn't know about the stealing," he mumbled. "I swear, Dad. I didn't know about the church funds. But you knew about the blackmail," I pressed. "You knew Emily was getting $5,000 a month from your mother. You knew that money was the only reason your yoga studio dream was staying afloat. Did you never ask where it came from? Did you never ask why your mother was paying your wife a salary for nothing?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was a confession. He had turned a blind eye because it was convenient. He had let his wife bleed his mother dry because he wanted the lifestyle she promised him. "Dad, please," he whimpered, changing tactics. He dropped to his knees, right there on the concrete. He grabbed my hand. "I am sorry. Okay, I am sorry. I was weak. I was scared. Emily, she is intense. She threatened to leave me. She said I was a failure. I just wanted to make her happy." He looked up at me with tears streaming down his face. "I am your son, Dad. Please. I don't have anywhere else to go. The accounts are frozen. The studio is in debt. They are going to seize the car. I need help. Just help me fix this, and I promise I will be better. We can be a family again. Just you and me." I looked down at the boy I had raised. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike. I remembered his high school graduation. I remembered how proud I was when he got his accounting degree. But that boy was gone. The man kneeling in front of me was a stranger. He was a man who had sat in a coffee shop 2 days ago and chose money over his father's life. He was a man who had agreed to lock me in a dementia ward to save his own skin. I pulled my hand away. "Stand up, Marcus," I said. He stood up, wiping his knees, looking hopeful. He thought he had broken me. He thought the father card still worked. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a long white envelope. It wasn't the power of attorney paperwork. That was in the trash. This was the document Saul had prepared for me on Friday. I handed it to Marcus. "What is this?" he asked, his hands trembling as he took it. "Is it a check?" "No." "Marcus," I said. "It is a divorce decree." He stared at the envelope. "Divorce?" "Yes," I said. "I am filing for divorce from your mother on the grounds of adultery, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Saul is filing it at the courthouse tomorrow morning." I pointed to the envelope in his hand. "That is your copy, or rather it is hers. Since you are the only family member she has left who isn't currently being processed by the police, you can give it to her." Marcus looked at me horrified. "You are leaving her now." "When she is at her lowest?" I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "I left her the moment she opened that safe, Marcus. I left her the moment she looked me in the eye and lied about the oysters." "This is just the paperwork." Marcus crushed the envelope in his hand. "But what about me?" he cried. "Dad, what about me?" "I have nothing. Emily racked up credit card debt in my name. The business loans are personal guarantees. If the studio goes under, I am bankrupt." I looked him in the eye. "I know," I said. "I saw the financials. You are about $200,000 in the hole. And with Emily in jail for fraud, the creditors will be coming for you by Monday." I adjusted my cuffs. "Good luck with that, son." Marcus's jaw dropped. "Good luck. That is it. You are just going to watch me drown. You have the house. You own this house free and clear. You could sell it. You could pay off the debts." I nodded. "You are right, Marcus. I do own the house, and I am going to sell it." Hope flared in his eyes again. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay, good. We can sell it fast. We can get a bridge loan. We can—" I held up a hand. "I am selling the house, Marcus, but not to pay your debts." I turned and looked at the old Victorian home that stood down the street, the home I had restored, the home they had plotted to steal. "I am selling it because it is contaminated," I said. "It is filled with the ghosts of your mother's lies and your wife's greed. I am selling it, and I am taking every single penny of the profit." I turned back to him. "I am going to buy a condo in Florida, or maybe a boat. I am going to spend my retirement drinking bourbon on a balcony and fishing. But," Marcus stammered, "the inheritance—" "There is no inheritance," I said coldly. "You spent your inheritance, Marcus. You spent it when you sat at my dinner table and told me I was crazy. You spent it when you handed that doctor a clipboard. You spent it when you chose them over me." I leaned in close. "You picked a side, Marcus. You bet on the wife and the mother because you thought they were the winners. You thought they had the power. You thought the old man was done." I tapped his chest with my finger. "You bet wrong. And in the real world, when you bet wrong, you lose your stake." I stepped back. "You are on your own, kid. Go find a lawyer. Go find a job. Go find a spine." I turned around and started to walk away. I walked toward my truck, which was parked behind the church. Dad Marcus screamed behind me, "You can't do this. I am your flesh and blood." I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. "I have no son." I said to the wind, "My son died the day he decided to bury me alive." I reached my truck. I climbed in. I started the engine. I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. Marcus was standing on the sidewalk holding the divorce papers, weeping into the empty air. He looked small. He looked defeated. He looked exactly like the man he had chosen to be. I put the truck in drive. I pulled out onto the road. I didn't look at the church. I didn't look at the house. I looked at the horizon. The sun was setting, but for me it looked like a sunrise. I was 72 years old. I was single. I was wealthy. And for the first time in a long time, I was free. I turned on the radio. A blues song was playing. I turned it up. I drove away, leaving the wreckage in the rearview mirror, and I didn't tap the brakes once. 6 months. 180 days. That is how long it has been since the lights went out in the Fellowship Hall of St. Jude's. That is how long it has been since the sirens wailed and the handcuffs clicked. I am sitting on a balcony now, but it is not the balcony of the house on 47th Street. I don't see the gray pavement of Chicago or the neighbors' fences. I see blue. Endless, deep, shimmering blue. I am in Florida now. The air smells of salt and hibiscus, not exhaust and betrayal. I am 72 years old, and for the first time in my life, I am completely, utterly free. People ask me if I feel guilty. They ask if I feel bad about what happened to my family. They ask if a man my age gets lonely living by himself in a condo that overlooks the Atlantic Ocean. I take a sip of my coffee and I tell them the truth. I have never slept better. The fallout from the Jubilee was nuclear. It didn't just destroy Bernice's reputation, it vaporized it. The forensic auditors the bishop called in were thorough. They found everything. They found the shell companies. They found the credit card fraud. They found that Bernice and Thomas had siphoned nearly $300,000 over 3 years. The trial was short. They pleaded guilty. They had to. The video evidence was damning, and the spreadsheets were a confession signed in Excel. Bernice is currently residing in a state correctional facility for women in downstate Illinois. She got 5 years. I hear she works in the library. I hear she tries to organize prayer circles, but the other inmates don't like her much. They can smell a fraud a mile away. She writes to me, 1 letter a week. I recognize the handwriting on the envelope, that neat cursive script that used to label my lunch or my medicine. I don't open them. I don't burn them either. I just put them in a box in the closet. Maybe one day I will read them. Maybe one day I will want to hear her excuses. But not today. Today the silence is too sweet to spoil. Reverend Thomas didn't fare as well. He got 5 years too, but he is serving his time in a medium-security prison that is a far cry from the Waldorf Astoria. The Porsche was seized. The Rolex was auctioned off to pay back the church. The last I heard, he had found Jesus again. Funny how people always find God when the devil stops paying the bills. And then there is Marcus, my son. I suppose this is the part where I should feel a pang of regret. A father should protect his child right. But Marcus wasn't a child. He was a 40-year-old man who made a calculated bet against his own father. The divorce from Emily was ugly. As soon as the handcuffs went on, Bernice Emily turned on everyone. She testified against Bernice to get a reduced sentence. She admitted to the blackmail. She admitted to the hush money. She avoided jail time by cutting a deal, getting off with probation and a massive fine. But she didn't stick around. The moment the money dried up, the moment the yoga studio dream collapsed under the weight of debt and scandal, she left. She packed her bags and moved back to her parents' house in Wisconsin. She filed for divorce from Marcus before the ink was dry on his own intake paperwork. She left him with the credit card debt. She left him with the business loans. She left him with a leased car he couldn't afford and a heart he hadn't bothered to protect. Marcus lost everything. The house, the car, the status. A friend of mine from the old neighborhood told me he saw Marcus the other day. He isn't an accountant anymore. No firm would hire him with his name attached to a massive fraud scandal. He is working at a fulfillment center for Amazon. He spends 10 hours a day on his feet scanning boxes, packing orders, running back and forth on concrete floors until his legs burn. He is making $15 an hour. He is living in a studio apartment above a garage, eating noodles, trying to pay off a mountain of debt that his wife created. He called me once, about 3 months ago. "Dad," he said. His voice was broken. "I am so tired." I listened. I didn't hang up. "Work hard, Marcus," I said. "It builds character." Then I hung up. It was harsh. I know. But he needed to learn. He needed to learn that the only money worth having is the money you earn with your own sweat. He is finally becoming a man the hard way. Maybe in a few years, when he has paid his dues, we can talk. But not yet. He is still in the furnace. I won't pull him out until the steel is tempered. As for me, I sold the house on 47th Street. It went for a cash offer, just like Bernice predicted. But the money didn't go to the Bahamas. It went into my bank account. I walked through the empty rooms before I handed over the keys. I stood in the living room where I had placed the teddy bear. I stood in the kitchen where I had found the Hennessy. I expected to feel sad. I expected to mourn the 40 years of memories. But the house was just wood and brick. The spirit had left it a long time ago. I locked the front door, dropped the keys in the realtor's hand, and walked away. I didn't look back. I moved south. I wanted warmth. I wanted sun. I wanted to be somewhere where nobody knew me as Brother Gus or Mr. Freeman the engineer. I wanted to just be Gus. I bought a condo on the 12th floor. It has floor-to-ceiling windows. I watch the sunrises. I watch the storms roll in over the ocean. It is majestic. And I bought one more thing. I finished my coffee and stood up. I walked down to the garage. There she was, a 1967 Ford Mustang convertible, cherry red, white leather interior. It was the car I had wanted when I was 20, but I couldn't afford it because I was saving for a wedding ring. It was the car I wanted when I was 40, but I couldn't buy it because I was paying for braces and college tuition. Now it was mine. I ran my hand over the hood. The metal was cool and smooth. I opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. It smelled of vintage leather and gasoline, the smell of freedom. I turned the key. The engine roared to life with a deep, throaty rumble that vibrated in my chest. I put the top down. I drove out of the garage and hit the coastal highway. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. The wind whipped through my hair, what was left of it. I put on my sunglasses. I wasn't driving to a job site. I wasn't driving to a church meeting. I wasn't driving to fix a mistake. I was just driving. I reached down to the passenger seat. There was no one sitting there. No nagging wife. No ungrateful son. Just a bottle. But it wasn't Hennessy Paradise. I don't drink cognac. That is a drink for liars and thieves. It was a bottle of Wild Turkey Rare Breed. Barrel-proof bourbon. Strong, honest, unpretentious. I pulled the car over at a scenic overlook. I killed the engine. The silence of the ocean rushed in to meet me. I uncorked the bottle. I didn't have a glass. I didn't need one. I took a sip. The whiskey burned on the way down, a good, clean fire that warmed my belly. I looked out at the water. The waves were crashing against the rocks, relentless and beautiful. I thought about Bernice in her cell. I thought about Thomas in his cage. I thought about Marcus in his warehouse. They had spent their lives chasing things, chasing status, chasing money that wasn't theirs, chasing a facade, and they had lost it all. I had spent my life building things, checking the foundation, making sure the structure was sound, and because of that, I was still standing. I took another sip of bourbon. I felt a smile spread across my face. It wasn't a polite smile. It wasn't a fake smile for a church photo. It was a real, deep smile that came from the soul. I raised the bottle to the sunset. "You tried to bury me, Bernice," I said to the wind. I laughed and the sound carried out over the water. "But you forgot that I am a seed." I started the engine again. The Mustang growled, ready to run. I put the car in gear. The road ahead was long and winding and empty, and I had a full tank of gas. We often spend our lives trying to build a shield of wealth to protect our children from the harshness of the world. But Bernice taught me that sometimes that shield prevents them from growing a spine. My son didn't need my money. He needed to feel the weight of his own choices, and my wife. She learned that you cannot build a sanctuary on a foundation of deceit. The true value of a person, like a solid building, isn't in how painted the facade is, but in the integrity of the beams that hold it up. In the end, the truth is the only thing that doesn't crumble. We are taught that marriage is a sacred bond and that forgiveness is a virtue. But there is a fine line between being a forgiving partner and being a willing victim. My wife and her lover thought my silence was ignorance. They thought my age was a weakness. But they forgot that before you can build a new life on lies, you have to make sure the foundation isn't watching you. Trust is precious, but self-respect is non-negotiable. Never let anyone, not even family, convince you that you are crazy just because you see the truth they are trying to hide. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us share more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, what is the one thing you have always wanted to buy for yourself but put off for your family? For me, it was this Mustang. What is it for you? I read every comment. Until next time, keep your eyes open and never ignore the cracks in the foundation.